Okay, the recording has started. So right now, just for the recording, I'm going through what's on our website. So on our Recreational Trails Program website, we have our application forms and guidelines. That's where you're going to find all the information you need. Like I was saying, the reimbursement claim forms portion of the website, I'm still updating. So if you're looking at some of those forms and you're not sure if they're updated, just holler at me and I will let you know. So with that, we'll go into the application guidelines. I already have it open here. And as you can see, you'll have to bear with me. Sometimes I'll just be kind of scrolling. I'll make it a little smaller for now. As you can see, I don't really have the time or care to put a big fancy title page on there. It's just a table of contents. But the nice thing about this table of contents, if you're on the digital version, is you can click to what you need. So I realize that everybody's not going to read every word. Please don't. That's a lot of words. If you really like reading, that's fine. But for me, that's a lot. So just really the first few sections are what you kind of should go over everything, especially if you're new. And then beyond those sections, you can kind of pick and choose what's relevant for your project. So hopefully the headers will help and you can know, this isn't useful or this part is. It's meant to be a catch-all. Not everything is going to relate to everyone. And then new this year, hopefully my returnees will appreciate I made a section that's specific to changes from the previous years. Because again, I know it's a lot to read through this document every year and know what's new. So a little bit about the Recreational Trails Program before we get started for folks. For those who don't know, it's a federally funded, of course, program, but it's funded through the Fixing America's Transportation Act, so the current highway bill. And then we receive our money, so Federal Highways gives out money via a calculation to each state, and our money is actually passed through MDT. So Federal Highways sort of gives this big, huge bucket of money with all these different appropriations to MDT, and then we get the pass-through, which is RTP. So what's relevant to you all is if you're a grantee, you will have some interaction with Federal Highway. They oversee our claims, so I approve, and then Federal Highways approve. So usually you won't really hear about it unless there's some sort of a federal issue with anything on your claim. But just so you know, that's sort of the background. Another important piece about the FAST Act is that it is expiring next year, so in 2020, well, yeah, next year, 2020. But this is our last year of funding under that bill. So unless it's reauthorized or sort of continued, likely they might continue it for a year. But just to know that that's kind of an important thing to have in the back of your head, that for this year in particular, we're not looking for multi-year projects that you assume you're going to be able to fund under the Rec Trails program, because we just don't know the future of the Rec Trails program. The program's been in place since the 90s, so it's one that's been very, very strong and very strongly supported, but with Congress these days, just who knows what's going to happen, and likely we won't know till the last minute, and all those things, all the fun stuff. We get about $1.4 million every year. And then from that, we fund somewhere around, we did 49 projects last year, 50 in the past, 52, stuff in that range of projects. So we get about 75 kind of solid applications in, which our committee reviews. So it's a fair bit. It's a fair bit of funding, and then a fair bit of applications that come in for that funding. We usually end up cutting about half of the application funds requested. We fund about half that. So about last year we got about $3 million in requests, and we did about 1.5. And then we'll talk more about the committee as we go through and sort of the whole funding process. But just for a background there. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? So
yeah.
You mentioned that this FAST Act sunsets next year.
Mm-hmm.
So if one were to procure an award under the 2020 program,
yep.
How long does that money last?
So it's a good question. So for folks on the phone, Cliff was asking if the FAST Act expires next year, if you receive a 2020 award, what does that mean for you? And the answer is that year 2020, those funds are secured. Those are yours, and you'll have 2 years. So each Rec Trails program grant, you have 2 years to expend your funds, and so that would be true of the 2020 cycle as well.
So it'd be 2 years from the contract date.
So it would be all of my 2020 awards will be closing October 15th. It's a set date, so it's October 15th of 2022. So you'll have until October 15th, 2022 to expend your funds. And for those who have current grants, you'll know that that's how it works. Each grant year, you have, when you're granted, you have 2 years, October 15th, 2 years from then to expend your funds. Some folks take that whole time. Some folks are done in a few months. It just sort of depends on your project. We at the Rec, in terms of my committee, it's up to you in terms of how the project runs.
Are extensions a possibility?
Extensions can be a possibility. We try not to have extensions, but certainly it's something we've done in the past, and it's unforeseen circumstances, that sort of thing. When it's really outside your control. Right now, what we have, though, that's kind of helped in that way is we have this 8-month reimbursement requirement that my current folks are woefully familiar with. It's a bit of a pain in the butt. It means that every 8 months you need to submit a reimbursement to me, and that's a hard thing. That's a federal requirement. Congress has put that in place with the program. And so what that's done, though, is it's made so a lot of our projects don't need those extensions because they're checking in with us essentially every 8 months to have funds expended and to have that project rolling. So I'm happy to say that my 2017 projects are closing out or just closed out on October 15th, and we have no extensions, which is, it's not necessarily a bad or a good thing. It's good from a bookkeeping standpoint of close those and be done. And fewer projects for me at one time is great. So yeah, we hope that you have your project planned in a way that even contingency-wise, you'd still be able to meet that October 15th 2-year deadline. Okay. So that gets us through that sort of first paragraph. I won't read through all the paragraphs. I'm going to talk about, otherwise we'll be here for hours. So as we all know by now, I'll take you through this. I can blow this up a bit. Cool. So our application timeline is similar to past years, but we have a sort of a caveat written in here for this year's. And another piece of the FAST Act, so let me just take you through the application timeline before I get into that. So I've sort of, the red portion is the application period portion, the blue portion is the review portion, and then the green portion is when you've got your funds and your go-in portion. So we, of course, the application period opened November 1st, and will run through January 31st at 3 p.m. it closes. So that's a Friday, 3 p.m. I will, of course, be in my office that day, barring something. But so you can literally contact me up to last minute. Please don't, especially with small things is fine. Oh, remind me how to submit this. Did I submit it? That's okay. But certainly those bigger things hopefully will come up, a little before that 31st date. So yeah, just let me know if you're having any issues. I'm happy to help during that time frame. And then essentially the next thing we do is we turn around those projects we've received applications for, we turn around into kind of an organized spreadsheet of the project and all that, and we put that out for 30-day public comment on our website. That public comment periods, really, we get a lot of, it's mostly positive comment. It's something that is really meant just to honestly more see the negative comments to see if there's anything we need to address. It's the positive comments, I sort of tally them and let my committee know if they received 40 positive comments. But that's not really the use of the public comment period. It's more just from our agency standpoint to make sure that no one's got a huge issue with any of these projects. Last year we only had 2 negative comments, and they were pretty ambiguous and just sort of things like, I hunt and I'm worried more people on the trail will mean, fewer animals or something like that. From there, then we are also at the same time running our internal review of the application. So we have two sets of reviews. We have an internal committee and we have our State Trails Advisory Committee. The internal committee scores the application, but also specifically looks at technical parts of the application and just make sure it meets criteria. So those that meet criteria get passed to the State Trails Advisory Committee. Those that don't won't hear back from me about end of February, early March if you don't pass that internal review. And the other folks, you won't hear from me, and that's great. That means you're going on to the State Trails Advisory Committee. Each year there's only about 5 to 10 applications that don't meet that internal review. So usually we built the application in a way that hopefully if you're reading everything and going through and, being fairly reasonable about the answers and checking the boxes saying, yes, I did this, then you're going to meet the internal review criteria. So hopefully that won't happen to any folks here in this room since you're here. And then April 2020 is when our State Trails Advisory Committee meets. So they get all the applications. We all do it online now. They get all the applications online. They review that on their own time in March and April. And then about mid-April, we meet in person for a 2-day meeting, and we discuss all of the applications. We go through each one and discuss funding amounts, fund in full, partial fund, that sort of thing. So that's when that happens. They make recommendations to us, and to us being state parks, Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and then we essentially take those recommendations. We don't tend to change them. So we'll take those recommendations forward and make our funding decision and announce to you all. So this is where our caveat comes in. The usual way it happens is you'd hear from me by the end of April, yes or no, and then we try to get those projects rolling as soon as we can for folks who want to get rolling as soon as we can. This year, what we have that's sort of a hiccup is we have what's called the FAST Act rescission to take into account. And what that is built into the final year of the FAST Act, which is 2020. Congress had input a rescission, which is a taking back of the authority to expend some of the funds. So it's a percentage-based thing, and it's this big calculation. And MDT, fish or federal highway passage, MDT, who tells us. So it's convoluted, and the answer is we don't know exactly what that's going to mean right now. We know it probably will be around $300,000 of our $1.5 million that we usually award could be subject to that rescission, so taken away. So what that means is that we might not know our final amount of what will be rescinded and rescission, what will be included under that rescission until that April, May, possibly even June. And therefore, we won't be able to, we'll take our State Trail Advisory Committee recommendations, but we may not be able to make our final decisions because we might have to tweak some numbers. So we may not be able to get to folks until May or June even to tell them yes or no, you were funded. Because we're not going to let some go and hold some back. We're going to do it all as a group and tweak our numbers if we need to. So two pieces there. So it's delaying our timeline a little bit. And of course, it could mean less project funding. So maybe a couple fewer, the few projects not funded, or a couple projects not funded to the level we might normally. It's not ideal. Yeah.
I've kind of noticed, this is my first time here, I've kind of noticed if you put in for a grant,
Mm-hmm.
say $10,000, and that grant sometimes does not get fully funded. No, we won't give you $10,000, we'll give you
Sure.
$7,000. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so what you're talking about is partial funding. So yeah, it's quite possible that I don't know, we'll just have less funding. So usually the projects that the committee wants to fund in full, they do. And then it's probably, that pool of partials, and then there might be some that they just decide, we're not interested in this year, given the less funding. Again, they really look at that strength of application. So it's hard to tell exactly what that'll mean, if that'll just mean that we sort of pull some numbers down and fund folks partially, or if they want to fund a few more in full and fund fewer overall. The other caveat to this, though, is that really, I don't know, I keep saying at any time, but it's also possible that this will be canceled. This rescission is affecting the entire FAST Act, so the entire highway bill. So it's not just us, but it's the transportation folks who are affected. Jeff can probably attest to that from MDT. So you can just think national, and this is a national thing, right? So just think nationally how big the transportation industry is and how many folks are not happy with this rescission. It has in other bills gotten taken out at the last minute, so it's possible get taken out, and then we'll be on our same old schedule and our same old amount of money, most likely. So that'll just sort of, this is just sort of our we're planning for the worst case scenario, and then hopefully the best case scenario may happen. No promises, but we'll plan for this for now. So the other thing that means is that we were able to get, last year, for example, we were able to get some folks' projects started in early mid-June and get them off the ground for those summer project folks. And this year, I think mid-July, with all that rescission stuff, mid-July is probably the earliest we're going to be able to get folks rolling with their funds. So again, just something to plan for as you're applying, if you're writing in your application timeline of what your project goals and metrics are going to be. Not to say, in June we're going to get started and do all this stuff, because we'll say that and we'll see that and go, are you? I don't think so. But we can't guarantee that we can get you your funds then. Another piece too is that as long as I've got your emails now and all that, folks who I have been emailing and those who are now, I'll add you to my list, and I'll let you know as soon as I know if this thing gets taken off the table or if there's updates. So that I will keep folks updated on. So I don't think it's possible we could hear before the end of the application period if the rescission is canceled or not, but it might go even into the spring. So there might just be that you find out last minute. I'm going to guess it's going to be last minute because that's just how everything's going these days. So just be ready. Yeah.
Yeah. I know you say they'd be expected to reimbursement, but could you start your project with your match funds and things prior to that, and then not expect to be reimbursed until after, July, or if you started before, then those are not reimbursable,
Yeah, so how it works is, you can't get anything reimbursed that happened before your project start date, and your project start date is when you signed your RTP contract. So, and I don't send that until we have our funds and all that. So that's what that July date is. So you can't expend any funds for which you can start. If your project's huge and you're doing all these other pieces and RTP is only this one chunk, you can of course start the other pieces, and that's fine that you're paying for separately. But the RTP portion needs to be started after your project start date. And important with that is the match too can't be accrued until after your project start date.
Gotcha.
Unless it's for design and engineering costs. Design and engineering costs can be accrued up to 18 months before, so anything you'd even be doing now for design and engineering on your project could be used as match for your Rec Trails program. But any other things, you can't just go out and start laying gravel and be like, well, that's going to be our match as we got this contractor out laying gravel, and we're going to do this other part with RTP. No, that would need to wait until July.
That's 18 months prior to your award date.
Yes. Yeah, so it's whatever. A year and a half from July. I never do the math, but it's rare that I see anybody go out that 18 months. So, yeah, but you could. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's a big piece about the rescission. There's a FAQ in these guidelines at the end. I know some folks, believe it or not, Kalispell folks, were interested in, well, who do we contact and can I get more information? So there's a little FAQ if you're interested that gives you a little more information about the rescission, and then of course the who do I contact is, senators and that sort of thing, on the federal level, just to let them know your thoughts if you're interested. That's just, I got that question, so throwing that out there. Okay. And like I said, we'll go over a bunch of this stuff. But that's the general timeline. Everybody knows, I think, hopefully, who's in this room, just because you were active enough to read that information I've sent out already. So everybody knows I hope this is a reimbursement program, right? So it's you expend your project funds, then we can reimburse you. So I cannot reimburse you until I see that your entity has expend funds and there's even a canceled check or an account statement, something showing that that transaction has taken place. The other piece of this is our match requirement. And I made this new graphic this year, hopefully just to, some folks have, I've started calling it, I've said it's 25% match, and everyone's like, I thought it was 20. And the answer is it's both. It just depends how you talk about it. So your match requirement is either going to be 20% of your overall project cost, so that's your request plus your match, or you can also calculate it as 25% of your RTP request. Just whatever works for you is fine. It's the same number. Mathematically, it works out. And my federal folks, you also, of your match, well, in addition, so you have your 80% of your overall project cost as your RTP request. You also have 5% of your overall project cost that come from a non-federal source. So that's for federal folks.
Does the 20% have to be non-federal?
The 20% does not, no.
You can match federal to federal.
You can, yeah. So with RTP is a bit of a unique program in that you can match federal dollars on RTP dollars. Again, if you're a federal entity, you also need to be ensuring that at least 5% of that total project cost is non-federal, but yes, you can use that as match. Another piece that's important with match that a lot of my new folks don't realize is on each claim, you also need to show this appropriate ratio of match, including your non-federal. So you can't, say, submit your first claim to me and just put all of your match in it and say, okay, done with match. The next claims aren't going to have any match. We actually need to see this carried through on all of our claims. So every claim you submit, say you're coming into me saying we expended, I always do this wrong, we expended $8,000. I'll also need to see $2,000 of match on that claim, including its documentation. And then for federal, we'll need to see that 5% as well, the non-federal. So, yeah, so I can help folks out with that, and I help them out with that. And that's where knowing that whatever you come in for your claim, your match is 25%. That's so when you go through. So just, again, keep that in mind as you're planning your budgets.
Match have to be accrued in that period that you're invoicing for?
Yes.
It doesn't. For your first reimbursement, of course, it would have. But for your second and third and fourth reimbursements, it can be from any portion. So you could have accrued all of your match in that first, before that first reimbursement, and then you can sort of delve it out as you go down the line. Yeah, so that's a good question. Yeah, you don't need to use match that's specifically tied to that reimbursement period, or that whatever you're reimbursing for. Hopefully I said that right. Or correct. I said that right. Hopefully I said that clearly.
Michelle, so with regard to the match, I know this is, maybe you'll get to this, but there's some language about there's a maximum amount of match.
Oh, yeah, that's a new thing. Yep. So Cliff was asking about the maximum amount of match, and just basically what we've decided, and this is, and we can talk about it now. It's fine. So with match, we have, of course, I'll call it the 20% requirement. So 20% of your overall project cost needs to be you need to match with that. But then another piece that's new this year is we're asking folks to just, if you're going to exceed that match requirement, only up to 5% exceeding that match requirement. That's not anything that I'm going to sit down with a piece of paper and calculate and throw you out because you did 27% match or whatever, but just something that we're asking folks to keep things cleaner and more simple for us. Us being Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, we actually we're like you all, like as we're passing it down to you all, we're also getting more and more oversight from Federal Highway in terms of what we need to show, what we need to report on, and one of those is match. And so we actually have to report on all the match that you say you're going to give, and then all the match you do give, and do all this. So it's really a lot easier if we can just keep it as clean as possible and have your match at the application portion of the Rec Trails program just be what you're going to then carry through as much as you can. and just that 20%, and not, a lot of folks like to go overboard and show all these salaries and all this stuff, and it's really, if you can winnow it down, that's what we're looking for. Just something that's really clear, something that clearly matches. And we've talked with my committee about that. That's not really a consideration anymore in terms of your amount of match. No one's going to look at that and say, oh, this is a better or worse application because of the amount of match there. They'll look at the type of match maybe. So, you know, to the extent you can, usually cash, that sort of thing is a better match than volunteer hours, although it depends on your organization, certainly, and the resources you have. So it's just if you can throw in any cash, that's great. But otherwise, yeah, I think that is about all my I think that about covers it. So yeah, again, it's not a hard thing, and this is the first time for it, but we're really just trying to get folks. Last year, what we did was we asked people not to match too much over the match requirement. We didn't really put any sort of number to it. We just, please don't match too much over the match requirement. And we still got quite a bit of folks just going like way over. So this is kind of an effort to make folks know, like, okay, when we say don't match too much over the match requirement, we mean like, you know, like just try to hit the match requirement really, and any above it, that's fine, but just try to hit it. So if you're going through your project and you've got a huge project and you've got a ton of match, please feel free to reach out, especially not the last week of the application cycle, but reach out and I can help you sort of decide what's the best, you know, clearest match to put in with your RTP budget. One other thing I've talked to folks about too is that on our RTP application, you'll see, and we can go over this once we're done with this portion, but on the funding strategy narrative, that's where you sort of talk through your line items. And there's a section that says, you know, what's your cash match, what's your cash match, what's your in-kind, and there's somewhere where I'll want you to specifically call out what your match is that you're going to be using for your budget, but you could also follow up with a few sentences about what else you'll be bringing to the project. Because I know a lot of folks, there's a lot more. So that's a place where you can sort of informally address.
In a narrative.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and that form, a lot of the forms have character limits, but that specific funding strategy narrative form does not, because I want folks to be able to explain their budgets, you know, to the extent they need to, without having to feel like they need to only do 2,000 characters or something. Okay, thank you. Good question. All right, and we will talk a bit more about the funding selection process, so I won't go over that quite yet. We'll go over that because I have a whole section on that. Pretty much eligible applicants is anyone. If you're an organization, you're eligible. No individuals, of course. But anyone else besides that, federal, tribal, county, city, any governments, any private entities, anything like that. So clear. This has not changed from last year. We have grant request categories. We've always had them. Our standard grant request is considered $10,000 to up to $70,000, and then our big grant request is considered $70,000 to $100,000. So of course our max is $100,000. It's not our minimum isn't a hard minimum. If you're looking to request below $10,000, that might be something that's all right. Just reach out to me first, and we can talk about it. The committee wanted to make that clear that was just sort of a, you know, a thing. Our big grants, people always want to know, well, what's the difference? What's a big grant? A big grant is basically the biggest difference, obviously, besides the amount for which you're going to ask, is because you're coming in for a larger request, we ask those folks to come and present in front of the State Trails Advisory Committee at the meeting in April. It's a short presentation, but it's just sort of they can see you and ask questions, that sort of thing. And then the other thing about the big grants is not a different pool of money. It's all the same pool, but you'll be considered, the State Trails Advisory Committee has decided to fund up to 6 of those. So they just sort of have placed for themselves a cap on the amount of big grant funds, big grants they'll award. That said, last year they only funded 1 big grant in full, another relatively close to full, but you know, so last year was only about 2 that got funded in full, The year before it was 4. So, it's just the big grants, they get a lot more scrutiny because there's a lot more pieces and that's a lot more money. So it's just something to sort of think about. I know a lot of folks are like, should I do the big grant? Should I come down and do the standard? And that's a choice that's up to you. But just in a
big grant application.
Last year, how many big grant applications? We got about 12, I think, 10 or 12 probably. I remember 2 years ago it was 12. 2 years ago it was 12. Last year it was about the same. Yeah. Or maybe it wasn't. Well, whatever. Yeah. Somewhere between 5 and 10 usually. So, yeah.
Does the advisory committee meet here?
The State Trails Advisory Committee meets. We go around the state. So it'll be in one of the cities. Last year we were in Bozeman, so we won't be in Bozeman again. I don't know. It might be Missoula or something like that. Not sure yet. But, yeah, I can let folks know, too. But yeah, that's one thing where I will reach out to the big grant applicants who meet technical criteria. Because there was one a couple years, so as long as you also need to meet that technical criteria and meet your, make it through that first review. But once you do that, I'll reach out to you and let you know that the location of the meeting and that sort of thing. So you sort of can plan for that. Okay. And then my tips for applying. It's pretty much just we'll talk about that when we get to the application, but it's pretty much just proofread your application. Quite honestly, proofread your application. I really do advise folks to, especially for the narrative portions of the application, to do it in some sort of a Word document, something outside of web grants that can, number one, check your spelling and grammar. Can perform character counts, but also if web grants has a snafu, the page you're on, stuff might get lost. If you save it and it's like former pages, I've never seen those affected really, but the page you're on, if you're working on something and you have a page and it won't save it or something strange, that way you don't lose all the boxes you did above you and you're like, oh. So just a good rule of thumb there really for any online application, honestly, but certainly applies to web grants. And we'll talk a bit about web grants. It's not the most intuitive, and I do what I can to help you. we use it, we work with it as best we can, we being me and you all together. But I have been with web grants now for almost 2 years, and so I can troubleshoot pretty much any problem. I do make that guarantee. I have only come across one that was very, very odd. But other than that, usually I can figure out what you're doing that's upsetting web grants that make you guys friends again. Because that's really what it's like. Okay. We are currently sharing. Great. All right, so here's our changes from previous years. We already talked our potential timeline delay and funding decrease. That's a rescission talk that we already just chatted through. So no new news here. And you'll see on all these too, for my folks, I kind of give a synopsis and then I give you the link to where in the document where this information is. So if you're a new grantee, you don't have to read this section. It's all in the document below. It's just that it's pulled out here for the folks who read this document every year. We are doing this year, our State Trails Advisory Committee did vote to increase our grooming reimbursement rates for the large groomers, so the piston bullies really, to $120 an hour. So anyone starting in 2020 grant cycle forward will use that rate. So when it comes to your calculations, in terms of your budget and your application, if you're using a piston bully groomer, use that $120 an hour rate. And we can talk more about the reimbursement rate further if folks want to in further sections. But just so you know, we haven't touched the we call it the standard, the standard rate, which is the $20 an hour. We didn't touch that this year just because it kind of came together a little later. What happened with this, the large groomer was that Montana Snowmobile Association came to us and had all this data and had the request. So in terms of the standard groomers, we just haven't kind of pulled that information yet. But that's certainly something we can look at for future years, especially with, I know some of you folks provided me information about what the actual cost of running that sort of machine does what that actual cost is. So that's something I'm willing to look at certainly and talk about, especially in the summer when we're not running through all this stuff.
So you're still soliciting that kind of information?
Please send that to me.
If you look at that next summer and then you approve a change,
Mm-hmm.
it would apply to the 2021 program if and when there is a 2021 program.
Exactly, yeah. So if we did, so likely this summer I will take a look at that $20 an hour grooming rate and see if we do want to bump that up. And so if we made that change, it would apply to the 2021 cycle forward. Assuming there is one, we'll assume there is one, quite honestly. But because if not, I don't have a job. No, I'm kidding. So this is a big one that some folks care about and some folks really don't. But we're no longer requiring letters of support just sort of as an umbrella term, and there's a whole bunch of caveats about it, and so I'll talk through that with you right now. So basically, just the general letter of support is no longer required. And by that, I mean those letter of support from the business in town saying, oh, we support this club in this project. The letter is from the school district saying, yeah, we like this project. Those sort of general letters of support are no longer required. In the past, they have been. They've always been a part of our program. And basically, our State Trails Advisory Committee had a big discussion in September this year and decided that those don't really sway them one way or another. Therefore, why require them? So what we did do was we pulled out when we do want to see letters of support or some other sort of commitment type documentation. And so one of them is if you're a private organization or entity, you should have a letter or meeting minutes from your organization saying that this RTP application and project, they know about it, they approve it, that sort of thing. You're not going rogue. Pretty basic, but that's there because we've had that happen in the past. That an organization had no idea they were applying for a grant. Yeah, I know. I wasn't here for it. I would have been funny. But also, if your project takes place on Forest Service land, for example, we want to see your cost share agreement, some sort of agreement from Forest Service, whatever that documentation is, saying, yes, we work with this group, whatever. And you all know, honestly, better than me off the top of your head what your documentation is. As you can tell, I don't always remember the right terminology for the right document.
I have a question on the challenge cost share agreements. Oftentimes, I don't have those until after the first of the year.
Okay.
Until after we know if we have a grant, but we will. So with the letters from the forest saying they support the project, work until that comes in.
So Mona just asked, with Forest Service, those challenge cost share agreements don't often come to the first of the year. So in that case, either or really. It's whatever is easier for you. If you have that challenge cost share agreement ready and you can just upload it, that's great. If they haven't given it to you yet and you have a letter, that's fine too. Just something from Forest Service that acknowledges that this project is happening and they're on board with it. Also, if you're on private lands, of course, we'll need to see some sort of a land use agreement, some sort of something saying some sort of sorry, I'm like totally blanking on these. But yeah, some sort of legal documentation from the landowner giving you that permission to be on the land and also public permission to use that land in perpetuity, hopefully some sort of an easement or something like that. Otherwise, we require at least 15 years of public access to the project. The other big one is if you have a commitment from an entity. If you're referencing in your application that such and such other organization's going to be supplying grooming hours that you're going to use as your match, or they're going to be you're going to have X, Y, and Z organization coming on to volunteer on this project to help out. We want to see that organization is acknowledging that and saying yes. So that could be a letter of support or what have you, but something where they acknowledge their donation to your project, essentially, or their commitment to your project.
Straight across all requests that completely open public access is required.
What do you mean by completely open public access?
Like
Like always? So the question was, is it required that completely open public access is required on all sites? And the basic answer is yes. I mean, contact me if there's some sort of gray area that you think might qualify, but basically it's, the public should be able to come on and use that, whatever the project is, those RTP, where we spent those RTP dollars at any time. Like I said, hopefully in perpetuity, but up to 15 years from the project date.
I would think there would be reasonable exceptions to
Sure.
that for like wildlife reproduction.
Yeah, that's true.
Sort of thing,
Right, and I mean, there are, that's
Something
true.
like
And I
that.
mean, I guess that's a good point. Yeah, so anytime where there's those sort of seasonal closures, certainly, of course, for things like that, yeah. And anytime where there is, also park hours, that sort of thing, like a lot of places, people aren't allowed after dark. So within reason, but if there's something where a landowner is just saying, I don't want somebody on my land during the summer because I use it, that wouldn't be an allowable case, so I guess there is a lot of gray area there, but just some acknowledgement to that and upfrontness about it. So let me know if there's like it sounds like you might have a specific case in mind, so we can always kind of work through that, but just those general things aren't a problem. Just when you get to the special cases that start to be strange. Okay. And that's it. We have now, part of this also the letters of support also came from the fact that I or Fish, Wildlife, and Parks also was implementing that. Those letters of support we do get, we want to see them typed, and we want to see them have a date and a signature attached. And I know for some folks, that's pretty like, oh, that makes sense. But it is something where we've gotten across the board. We get handwritten things, we get things, so that was another piece too, where the State Trails Advisory Committee said, okay, that's fine, but then let's not require them so folks don't feel like they have to get all these letters from folks and have them typed and have them, have signatures. So that's covered later in our documentation section, but just the kind of basics of what you would expect there.
So earlier you talked about the public comment period being kind of, we're mostly looking at the people that were potentially having problems with the project.
Yeah.
Now that you've gotten rid of the requirement for the general recommendations, would you encourage those people to go on the public comment side?
They could. Like I said, so the question was if we would encourage folks without the letter of support requirement to kind of use the public comment period to show their support. And they could. Again, those are just sort of tallied, I'm not going to lie. And that's really all the State Trails Advisory Committee considers of that. There are other ways, and we'll talk a little bit about it, but there are other ways to show support for the project. Because quite frankly, most of these projects have a ton of public support. They just do. And I think that's the end of it.
So the tally's not terribly important.
No, it's not. Quite frankly, and I'll mention it, and they say, okay, like there is support. It's just kind of a check or whatever, It's more just a check mark. Okay, there's support. It's not like, oh, there's, like, of course, the Missoula project's going to have 20, it's going to have 200 people submit emails to me. Like, that's fine, So I mention that, and they say, okay, cool, it just is what it is. There are other pieces the committee are looking for that are more important to them than just folks writing in and saying we support this. And that's because they know everybody does good work, and they're all, quite frankly, you all have a lot of public support. You just do. So you don't need to kind of kill yourself on the public support side, I guess. You all have it. Oh, the match. We talked about that. It's just talking about the 5% change. And then our scoring criteria, I always feel like I really play this up just because I keep saying, I'll get to that, but I will. We have this section where it's drawn out for you more. We do have an upcoming change with our volunteer documentation. Probably will honestly be implemented once I finish these trainings for folks who are currently my grantees. And for anybody who's new, just a heads up, this isn't affecting the application at all, but just a heads up that if you're saying you're going to have volunteer hours, that's fine. We count those at $20 an hour for your match. That's all right. But we are going to be having a slightly more exhaustive way of you documenting those hours. It's a change that came down just from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. It's not my choice. But basically, they're going to be recorded in more of a timesheet fashion with a volunteer signature involved. Yeah. As opposed to just, we used to just have a sheet where you could write down the name and the person's phone number and count their hours. So this way, the one thing is, well, we're not going to make you write down the phone number anymore. It's like, great. But you still need the name and their signature.
And they have to sign it. Yeah.
And they have to sign it. So what I'm developing for folks, just that's a heads up for anybody who's going to put in an application. Again, you don't need that with the application. It's understanding that you're going to get that when you accrue those hours. And for those of my folks who are current grantees, I will let you know when it's honestly, like, really, I should have probably, according to my compliance, I probably should have done this back in September, but I didn't. So I'll probably roll that out towards the end of the month here, after Thanksgiving most likely, and you'll see I'll give you the new forms we're going to use. There's one for groups of volunteers, so if you're having like a work day, you can have everybody come and do put their name and sign the amount of hours. And then if you have sort of a perpetual volunteer who's with you all season, who goes out, several different weeks and works on the trail by themselves or whatever, you could have that person have like a personal kind of more timesheet style where they just sign once at the bottom once they've accrued all their hours for the season. So
the form on the website is not the form you envision.
The form on the website is, once I implement this change will no longer be adequate. I will replace that form on the website with a new one. So for my ski folks, I know I've got ski folks in the room, so I will get that to you as soon as possible. For my summer folks, this will just be something that you're ready for next year, which is a good time to roll it out to you all. For anybody who has a current grant, any volunteer hours accrued before when I get the form to you can be used on the old form. That's fine. Just hours accrued going forward from when you get the form. If you have hours from back in, August still, you can still put them into me and have that old form because I understand you're not going to be able to chase down all the volunteers and get their signatures in retrospect. So just a heads up there, and again, my current grantees, you'll get an email with all this information. You know me, you'll get a whole bunch of, there'll be like numbers and bullet points. And we can talk through, I know a lot of groups had also asked, we already use something kind of like that, so especially if you're a grantee with me multiple years, we can certainly work out something with your organization that kind of works with what you already have that also meets our requirement, and then you can just have that one for you. Okay, so that one's not the greatest. I wouldn't. Our joke in one of the other trainings was, next is it like the thumbprint with the blood. You're gonna have to.
Facial recognition.
Yeah, totally. But it is whatever. It is what it is. We'll just say it that way. It is what it is. We all get it. Oh, and then I'm just scrolling through, but we have travel-related costs. Nothing's changed with travel-related costs in terms of what we do. It's just the rates have changed, and that includes our per diem rates, our mileage rates. They really just haven't been updated. They changed most years, and I just haven't gone on our website and updated them. So they're updated now in this document. We'll get to those. But like I said, the per diem rates have all gone up. The mileage, I think we're at 0.58 per mile. That's gone up, and that's here, and that's in this document. That's just more of a heads up for folks. It's the same way we're doing everything, just new rates.
Does the advisory committee set the volunteer rate?
No.
We do. Yeah, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks does, though. And I imagine it used to be 15 until 2017, and then in 2017, it was $20. Yeah, and I believe Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, along with the State Trails Advisory Committee, made that decision, and I don't know I wasn't here then, I don't know what it was based off, but.
The state one is now like 22 or something. the federal ones.
Yeah. We're at 20. Yeah.
I had heard, I don't know where I heard this, that all that reimbursements for travel time and gas and all that was going to change. Is that true or not? Or they were just going to go to hours worked at the site or the project site?
No, well, so the question for folks on the phone, the question was, per that sort of travel reimbursement costs are going to change or how we do it. I haven't heard anything like that. I think the only thing that's going to sort of change is we're going to tighten up the fact that we are supposed to be like the volunteer hours, collecting things with a signature on it. And if in a lot of cases, if you're claiming travel time and the per diem associated with it and the mileage, well, not the mileage, but the per diem associated with the travel time, we need actual travel times,
Right.
Which is what we as state employees have to do. So it's just you guys all have to do it too, is the answer. So I guess it's not that it's changing. It's just something that we haven't really been implementing a ton. But yeah, so if someone's traveling to a trailhead and they want to be able to claim per diem, then they need to be logging, and I have that form pretty much up. It's very complicated, which is why I'm like, so yeah, it's a very complicated form because between the per diem and the lodging rate, which we don't really use a ton of, but it's there, and the mileage, that's kind of all wrapped into one form, and it's a very confusing form. So I'm trying to make it a little easier for folks to use, but still get the information we need, because it's built for state employees, not for you all, so I'm trying to tweak it so it's built a little bit more for you all and not for us. Anyway, but it's really nothing's changed there. It's just that we're going to make folks kind of be sure they're using that form, and that we definitely, now again, clearly signatures are important, right? So that we need to have that signature from that person who was traveling and who's claiming that rate or those hours or what have you. Yeah, I feel like I had one more thing to say, which is why I'm stopping. But yeah, anyway. But yeah, please, if you're doing a huge, for your budgets, all that matters, of course. For your budgets and your application, of course, what matters really for that is just hitting the right rates. Again, if you're using the rate from last year or 2 years ago, we're not going to throw you out. It's just just try to make sure you capture those correct rates, and then going forward too, I can work with folks who I see. What I'll try to remember to do is flag folks who are funded, who have those travel costs, and make sure to follow up and make sure you guys have the right forms. But I will also update our website in the meantime. Hopefully in December, I'll be able to get all that stuff squared away and up there. So that way it's there as well, and you're not using the wrong form. And I really hate that the wrong form's up there. I would just pull it down, except that I've been doing this, and just pulling it down is not something I can do by myself.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yes, it's all new to me, so it's been very informative for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeremy. Cool. All right, so now we have our general requirements section. So we've just that was all of our changes, our general requirements. So now none of this is anything new. So everybody, you can all leave. We've all been here before. No, I'm kidding. You can all tune out. No, so our system for award management stuff hasn't changed. So anybody who gets a federal award needs to be registered in the system for award management, which is the SAM, the dreaded Sam and Duns. It's a super arcane old system. It's really annoying. They send you spam emails once you're registered in the system for award management. But that's all on the side. So for the RCP application, you're gonna include your proof of SAM registration. I'll show folks how to do that here in a second. But really, it's just any documentation PDF you have that's got your cage code and your DUNS number on it.
Can I add something to this?
Yes.
Here? You do not want to wait till the last minute to get this stuff figured out.
Yes.
Because it takes weeks to get this stuff approved and
in some cases months. Yes.
Paperwork. So
yeah.
Expect 4 to 6 weeks for this stuff to get ironed out.
Yeah. So Nate, or not Nate, sorry.
Drew.
Thank you. Nate's on the thing. So Drew just pointed out for folks on the phone, if you didn't hear, expect 4 to 6 weeks for this process. I've even seen if you accidentally put in the wrong thing on, that doesn't match your IRS records, then you got to go back, and that can take months. And so one thing to know about this, so that gets me to, for new folks, we don't need you to be registered by the time of your application, because that's clearly a pretty hard process to hit in the application time frame. But you'll check a box saying that you agree that you will be registered by the time you receive your award. So you'll go through that process. Even if you don't know you're going to get your award, you're going to get it started, is what you're telling me. Because I cannot give you your funding until you have that SAM. And for some folks, that's delayed their project start, which really isn't ideal for me or for them. And that's something we're really trying to get to not happen at all. We just want folks to have it and have it done, or have it mostly done. Of course, there are some extenuating circumstances, and we had someone, for example, this year who took them until September, and it wasn't. She was working diligently. It wasn't her, but that's why we need people to get started early on it. Yeah, and then the other piece is once you're in the system for award management, you're going to have to renew every year. My compliance counterpart, Samantha, she's good about reaching out to folks when she sees that due date coming up. The other thing you'll get, as everybody knows who's in it, is you'll get the sort of spam phishing type emails from folks that now have your email address that will reach out and say a service saying they'll do it for you for a fee. Don't ever follow those prompts. It should be a free thing, and you should do it through the website. So those are just some junky, crappy businesses that we all wish didn't exist, but they're there and they'll reach out. So just ignore that part. And
Do people get phone calls as well? Because I just got a phone call a couple days ago. Yeah.
Yep.
Basically saying we see you're registered for government contracts and we want to help you get business.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
When you go on SAM, it makes it public.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, I'd only received the emails before.
Now you got a phone call.
So I'm concerned they're starting. I don't know how they got my cell number, but they did apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get phone calls.
Bummer. Yeah, so for folks on the phone too, we heard people now are starting getting some phone calls that are likely related to this SAM registration. So it's unfortunate. Again, there's somewhere, nothing I can do. And this is one. They might be redoing it, the system for award management, which, oh God, apparently it's going to be better. It's going to be great. And it's going to be happening soon, so that's the only, at least we know it might not happen too soon. But so just a heads up there for my current grantees too, is that at some point this will be replaced with another platform. Don't ask me when that point is, and don't ask me what that platform is. And we'll all have to go through all the heartache of moving over. But I don't know when that is. I've heard rumors, so that's just to know. Again, not my favorite part of the program. Parts of this program, as you can tell, I get it. I get it, is what I'm saying. But reach out to me, too, if you're having issues. I will help as best I can. That said, if you're having real issues with SAM and SAM.gov and all that stuff, it's really going to have to be done through their website and their systems, unfortunately.
I will say, if you do call the support for Dunn and Bradstreet, they are very helpful. So it never hurts to call Dunn's and ask for help.
Nice. Cool. That's good to know. Good to know. Yeah, so the support for Dunn and Bradstreet, we've heard, is pretty good. I feel like I'm just like mansplaining you all, because like you say, but it's for the microphone, I swear. I don't normally repeat everything everybody says in a louder voice. Okay, and everybody, most folks are familiar, we talked a little about this already, our 8-month reimbursement requirement that we have. Again, this is another thing that if I could change it, I would, but I can't, so we deal with it. It's basically saying that from your project start date and through your project, you have 8 months to to submit a reimbursement request to me. And then once you submit a reimbursement request, your 8-month clock starts again. The idea with this was Congress put this in place because they wanted to see funds moving. They just saw a huge pot of money sitting there, no funds moving. So this is here to make sure funds move in the federal award management system. So folks ask me, for example, well, how much does a reimbursement request need to be? And the good news is there's no minimum. Congress, nobody stepped in and said it needs to be X amount. I asked folks that their reimbursement request shows the idea is they show progress on the project, right? So it needs to show some bit of project, hopefully at least a couple $100 to depends on your award amount, but at least a couple $100 to just something showing that you're working on the project. The hardest part with the reimbursement requirement, I'm gonna just say for my summer folks, is those folks who have summer projects. My winter folks can kind of, get their first one in and kind of make their timeline work in a way that they can bridge the off season if they need to. The summer folks are the ones who, as you can imagine, looking at this start date, if you don't get started until July, if you don't even find out that you're going to get funds until June and you don't get your project money until July or August, what work can you really do? A lot of folks say, well, it's all right, we'll just start the project in June of 2021. And that would be okay, except that you need to get a reimbursement request into me by, you can see 8 months, so I'll need to see one either by March 31st or April 30th, depending on your project start date. So we have some creative ways we've worked through that with folks. One way is that we can always, if you're doing a project with materials and that sort of thing, those can maybe hopefully be ordered in advance of your project work actually getting done on the ground. We also have had a lot of folks who will do some sort of project planning, like flagging for their project, that sort of thing in the fall time period. So that way at least they've got some maybe design dollars, because once your project start date hits, you can then expend funds on things like design dollars, that sort of thing. So I can always work with you to identify something you can do in the fall or the spring, early spring or late winter that you'll be able to bill for us, so we can make you bridge it through to the summer. And then beyond that, it's just sort of a matter of keeping in your head that when a reimbursement request goes in, you'll need another one in 8 months. And hopefully, one thing I do as the RTP manager is I track all that for you, because this is again a congressional or a federal thing, and so it's important for us too that your projects kind of stay in good standing on the federal level. So I track all that for you, and I send out emails to folks 2 months before their deadline and 1 month before their deadline, so you're not forgetting it, because I know it's like, what? When did I submit my last one? When is it? So I keep track of that for you and keep you informed. So hopefully it's not a surprise. And this, for the past year or so since I've been able to do that and keep folks more informed, we haven't had any major issues. Everyone's been really good. We've worked together, I think, really well about making sure everybody's getting and hitting these deadlines. So just again, for the application, just sort of a heads up, and something that when you do, we ask for a timeline. It doesn't have to be too in depth, but it's something to certainly call out is when your first reimbursement request, you expect to get that in. So that way you're sort of acknowledging to me like, yeah, I know, I got to get this thing in.
I'm praying for early spring.
You're praying for that would be great, I think, for a lot of my folks, yes.
Because I have nothing to expend money on the grant on except for the contractor, and he can't get on the ground till his frost is gone.
Yeah.
And I've got a thing due in April, and I'm going. So that's what I said.
Yeah.
Great.
Michelle, question.
Yeah.
So regarding grooming grants in our case, from a timing standpoint, I understand 8 months. If we have an outstanding 2019 RTP grant, do we expect will be expended over 2 years, or at least somewhere between 1 and 2 years? Can we go ahead and if we win a 2020 grant, can we make a claim on the 2020 grant to meet the 8-month requirement, even though we have outstanding funds on the 2019 grant yet?
Yes, yeah. So that's Thank you, Cliff. That's a really good way to do it too. So if you're a grantee who's got multiple grants going, as long as it's within, as long as the expense is within what was approved on your funding strategy narrative, which in your case it would be because you're getting a grant essentially every year for grooming activities, right? You know, plus or minus this or that, but still. Then as long as it's a grooming activity that's eligible under your what you wrote in for your funding strategy narrative, that's something that while normally you would honestly put it towards your 2019 grant and expend those funds first, you could take one chunk of a payment and just put it under the 2020 grant, so that way you can hit that reimbursement request deadline and then bridge it to when you're then going to expend those 2020 funds. So yeah.
So is it typical? I mean, there's another snowmobile group here, but is it our ski club? I'm sorry. Is it typical to have sort of a rolling 2-year grant?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's very typical that,
as opposed to applying each year,
yeah,
assuming you're going to spend it in 1 year.
Yeah, very actually for both snowmobile and ski, and for motorized the motor trail vehicle riders, and for my folks who just do the same old. Not same old, made it sound bad. For my folks who do the just summer trail maintenance type stuff, yeah, it's very typical that a lot of these maintenance style projects have multiple year grants, and they are holding them at the same time and you know, expending funds at the same time. That's typical. Yep. Yeah, a lot of I consider, you guys are kind of all under the maintenance umbrella. I know grooming's not maintenance, but it is in that it's a similar style of project and that it's just sort of an ongoing effort to keep something up. Okay. That's our 8-month reimbursement request deadline. This one, like I said, this one's one where extensions aren't really an option. I can give you a couple weeks, but that's about all I can give you. So reach out. This is where, in a way, the one nice thing about this is it's really helped my communication with my grantees. We used to give folks money and not hear from them for 2 years, and then it'd be, oh, we had a huge problem and we can't expend our funds and we need an extension. And that was like, you know, on October 14th of the grant close date. And now, you know, we're very dialed in with what you're doing and where you are, and so you can always reach out and we can find a way. We can find a way to make it work. But it's true. We've been able to work through everything in terms of meeting this requirement with everyone because I think we've been working proactively. I think if we were doing it a little less proactively, we'd have some real problems. But there's a solution. There is. We'll find it. Okay, we talked a bit about this already. This is just documentation of project support and approval. So this is what we talked about with the letters of support. So this is just going slightly into more detail. So give that section a cruise if what I said kind of didn't sit well or you need to think a little more about it, and then reach out to, this is one where it's newer, so please reach out if you're really struggling with, should I get, because I've had a lot of folks say, well, you say they're not required, but should I get letters of support? And I say, well, you know, it'll depend. It'll depend on, you know, especially too, if you're a newer organization, maybe you want to get 1 or 2 just so the committee, you know, can see that. That said, most folks, like I said, are familiar. We have folks from the snowmobile side of the, you know, on the snowmobile side, and we have folks on the motorized side, and we have folks on the non-motorized side. So between our committee, pretty much everybody at least knows some organization in one way, shape, or form. But you know, reach out if you're really struggling with, should I get a letter of support? Shouldn't I? Should I include this? Shouldn't I? That's what I'm here for. Because I know it's a little ambiguous and it's new, so some folks are really not sure how to wrap their heads around it. And here's the little section about if we do get letters, this is what we want to see. So we want them to be typed. We want them to be from an organization unless it's somebody like a donor, right? Of course, if it's an individual donating money, or if it's an individual landowner next to whom your project runs that you feel like, you know, is important to show, like, yeah, that person doesn't mind that they're going to have, you know, a work crew in their backyard for 2 months. Again, signed and dated, and that they're not form letters, so we want them to reference the project. it's quality over quantity, really. And again, just not anything you have to include if this is seeming like, gosh, I can't, no one's going to give me that. Like, that's all right. There are other ways to show your support. Okay, one other thing we need to see too, same as before, is our landowner permissions. And this is what we talked about already. Again, in lieu of letters of support, and in some cases we need this as well, is we need permissions from landowners, including easements, if that's something that pertains to your project, or if it's just Forest Service, we just need to see some form of letter or agreement with them that says, yeah, we know about this. We do get quite a few times. Let's say it's not uncommon that we get maybe one every year that's working on Forest Service, but there's nothing from the Forest Service, and so it's kind of like, it shouldn't be, you shouldn't leave the committee guessing at all. So you want the committee to always say, does the Forest Service know about this? Yep, they do. Here's the letter that says yes. So private property, those agreements and easements, winter grooming operations, we like for those easements, agreements, whatever, to be valid for a term of 5 years. Although you say, Mona, you get yours every year?
On the challenge cost share?
Yeah.
No, we get on the big grant, they do it for 5 years.
Okay.
But some of them are for 4 years, 3 years, and then they do a modification on them.
Okay.
And I'm at this point at the end of 5 years. So I don't know if they're going to do a mod or if they're going to do new ones, because I just send in my final reports on them.
Oh, okay. So that's good to know. Yeah. So folks, yeah, this says 5 years and makes it sound like it needs to be 5, but that's one where those sort of situations are understandable. And as Mona was saying, it says here further down is just if you don't have it or if it's expiring, a letter will do just fine from the forest saying that, yeah, it's just, we get it. We have somebody from the Forest Service who's an advisor on our council, so he also is usually able to very easily say, oh yeah, we know about this, or hold up any red flags. Okay. Sorry. Whoa. This is, here we have some sections that are just sort of, contact me if this applies to you, is the short answer to this. And this is anybody who needs to get any sort of railroad certifications, utility certifications, that sort of thing. Anyone who's working in an MDT, state highway right away, that sort of thing. We'll need all of that sort of background documentation, these certifications in place when you're applying for RTP. So if this pertains to you, please reach out to me, but you should have done all that legwork by the time you come to RTP to make sure that the utility company is not going to put a big kibosh on the project, or the railroad is who said they were going to work with you when it comes to actually doing the on-the-ground work for the project, decides that they're not comfortable anymore with a trail going in their corridor. So we've had that happen plenty of times. A lot of RTP projects have been killed by this sort of thing. So that's why we now require them at the time of application, all this stuff to be researched and set in place. And Davis-Bacon wage rates apply to anyone working in a federal aid highway right-of-way. So if that's you, read this section and ask me. Reach out if you have questions, and we can work on that. I haven't yet had a project like that, so I honestly don't know much about it, but that's one where I would figure it out if you're doing that. So reach out. Okay, now the long-awaited. I've talked about this so much, right? So basically, what's happened this year? There's a couple things going on. First of all, we've had. It was my first year reviewing and scoring applications last year in 2019. As it was, Jeff was on our internal review committee, and somebody else from MDT. It was her first year looking at the applications as well. And then the other person, it was her second year. So a new group of folks who were looking at the scoring criteria, and I just collectively really felt like, wow, these are It's a lot. It was a lot. There were 12 is the answer. That's the easiest way to put it. There were 12 scoring criteria, and some of them are quite specific, and some of them were kind of ambiguous and vague. Anyway, so it kind of dawned on us that we should take a look at them. The other piece is that we have our state, and we can talk a little bit at the end about this, but we have our state recreational trails program that got approved through Senate Bill 24. That's going to come online in 2021, and we're planning that will use the same scoring criteria as this one. So it was just time to look at our scoring criteria. Also, in doing so, I learned that they hadn't been changed since the program was put in place in the 90s. So, wow. So lo and behold. So what we wanted to do was basically, we wanted to simplify them, mostly for us, quite honestly, but also what we end up simplifying for us in this case works for you as well, I think. We wanted to sort of combine some and do that sort of thing. So that's what I did. I also called out, there's no change here in how we did anything last year or the year before. I just put it down on paper so it was written there for you guys, because it never, if you read our scoring criteria before, it made no reference to the fact that we do an internal review or anything like that. So I started with talking about, well, here I termed it the preliminary review, but this talks about that preliminary review and what we're looking for. So the preliminary review panel, there's about 4 of us. There were last year, so myself, my compliance officer, and then 2 folks from MDT. We all take a really deep look at the applications, and along with the other scoring criteria, we are doing the technical review for these pieces. So we're making sure, I mean, the first one's silly because you can't hit submit until the application's complete, but the application's complete. What's in the application is an eligible use of RTP funds. So, of course, if you're asking for something we actually cannot fund you for, we're not going to let you go forward. And there's an appendix in the RTP guidelines that talks about the eligible uses. The project's ready to proceed, so that one's a little more, it just is, you're acknowledging you're going to meet that 8-month timeline, that whole thing. Your timeline doesn't stand out, the timeline you've given us in your application doesn't stand out to us as like red flags, whoa, this isn't going to meet our 8-month reimbursement stuff. You're not saying, in 2021, we're going to get started and do all this work in August, so that sort of thing. We're making sure you meet that match minimum requirement. Again, I'm not going to kick you out for the maximum requirement. Just try to be close to the minimum requirement. We're going to make sure your environmental review requirement has been met. So this is just anybody who's submitting a project that, a request for anything that isn't just an education type project or equipment purchase will need to have some sort of environmental documentation. We can talk a little more about that. I have a whole section on it about what you need based on what your project is, but just knowing that you'll need to hit that as well. And that you're showing if you need, especially if you're on private land, you've got that landowner permission that shows this is a project that will be publicly accessible. You've got approval from your organization, and if you're one of my current grantees, you're compliant. You're in compliance with your current grants. Everybody in this room is. Everybody is, honestly, right now anyway. So it's very rare that folks fall out of compliance, but if you somehow did, I would hope that you wouldn't also then be coming to me and saying, please give me more money while we work through this huge issue, because it takes a lot to fall out of compliance technically, but just heads up there. Just a heads up. We never actually said that, so we say that now. So we look at those pieces, and if something's very blatantly not meeting one of these, you're out, and we'll get back to you, and we'll tell you why, and that whole thing. And but that's just, that's how it is. From there, we pass anyone else to the State Trails Advisory Committee for review. Again, the vast majority will meet those criteria. We'll pass them on for review. And then, and then our funding decision meeting. So our review criteria that we're looking at in terms of the actual scoring of the application, this is similar. You'll notice folks who I don't have it all on one page, but oh well. Folks who have worked with us before and looked at this, they're going to be similar. They're just what I did was I condensed the 12 really down to 6, and when I did that, I didn't want to. I wanted to keep the scoring proportional to how it was on the old thing, just because I didn't feel like I could really mess with that. So that's why the weights sort of match when I combine 2 together, for example. Then I'll have the times 2, so we didn't lose that extra scoring. So it's pretty much, it should score similarly, very similarly to how it was before. It should just be easier for us to score it, and for you folks to understand what you're being looked at for. And then on the application, we have narrative boxes that sort of match all these. So you kind of know where we're looking for a lot of this stuff. So number 1 is our access and connectivity. So public access, is it improving your connection to natural, cultural resources, that sort of thing? Is it providing extra linkages, all that stuff? Recreational opportunity is number 2. So again, are you providing an expanded recreational opportunity to whom? Really, this one's kind of what user groups, that sort of thing. Will give additional consideration if you're truly a project who's providing increased access for non-traditional trail users, so folks with disabilities, senior citizens, that sort of thing. Again, this is one that we used to have that piece specifically called out as its own criteria, and what we found was folks who didn't have that as a piece of their RTP project were really trying to craft the language to hit it. And so this is just a nod, your project doesn't need to have that aspect to it. If it does, we'll probably give it a few extra points, but it's not something you need to hit, and that's what we're trying to get at with a lot of these, is you don't need to fit yourself into a box if your project is not fitting into that box. 3, we're talking about the need. So this is where you can show your need and demand. And again, need and demand, as we talked about, can be that kind of public support piece, but we're also looking for things like planning documents. Does this fit in within somebody's planning document, a Forest Service planning document, a county city planning document? Are there any sort of formal agreements, like your agreements with the Forest Service? We're going to look for those. Research and data was a new one that folks have, my committee has brought up, but they said they'd like to see more in the lines of that, sort of how many users are on this trail? How many more folks do you expect to see? I know some of those numbers are hard for folks, but trying to think about some of those numbers without completely making them up, quite frankly, but trying to put a little science behind thinking about that so the committee can really understand what more this project is doing for you. Who is this project benefiting? And again, the key concept is more, because in a lot of cases, especially with maintenance, these resources are there. So what more is this going to do? Is it going to make it safer and therefore more folks are going to come out? Well, how many more? How many ish. And then 4 is another one where I very clearly put a couple criteria into one. Benefits of the RTP project. Folks will remember that we used to have A and B at least were very specifically called out as separate criteria, and now they're under one umbrella. So you don't need to feel like you need to hit both. So this is just asking, what are the unique benefits of your project beyond what's we've already talked about in terms of the recreation, but are you protecting and enhancing resources? Are you providing some sort of resource interpretation, safety, ethics along with this? Are you putting in signs that are going to help folks know to stay on the trail, that's going to protect a resource, that sort of thing? Again, you don't feel like you have to hit all of them or any of these. Maybe you have something else that this project is doing that's worth considering by the State Trails Advisory Committee. And then development, are you bringing in all these partners to carry out this project, and then for future maintenance, is this bringing folks together, under that umbrella? Then always everyone's favorite, but always here and important, is our short and long-term maintenance. This was here last time and really hasn't changed. this is just for folks. We want to be able to see that you're thinking about the short and long-term maintenance of the project. For folks who are doing new construction and new stuff, that's really easy to conceptualize. That one, it's clear what we need to see. In most cases, we want to know that you're going to take care of the project and that you're not going to come back in 5 years for RTP dollars to maintain what we helped you put in. But for folks who are a lot of my maintenance folks and grooming folks, just sort of this one I kind of think of as you're giving a nod to what your intentions are in terms of keeping these projects up. If it's continuing to utilize RTP dollars, that's fine. But what other resources? What's your kind of club's outlook on how to keep this stuff maintained, or how to assist Forest Service with keeping this stuff maintained, or whatever you're doing. So just sort of talking about the future and the future of how these projects are going to be maintained, whether it be with RTP funds or not.
Those maintenance pieces be considered match within the award period?
Yep, the maintenance may be considered match. Yep, if it's in the award period and you haven't expended all your funding, and that said, it needs to be related to your RTP project clearly. So you can't be doing maintenance over, on the east side of a trail, and your RTP project is specific to the west side of a trail. But if it's all in, a trail corridor, and you're doing some maintenance activities, and some of them you want to include as match, some of them you want to include as your expenses, that's something you could design your budget that way, certainly. And then one we never had, but we always considered, so I created a criteria because we look at it, is your application quality and clarity. So, that's kind of obvious, but it just needs to be said, and it needs to be included formally. So, again, we're just mostly looking to see some of these projects, it's cleared, somebody didn't spend any time on it really, or they did it at the last minute. So we want to be able to we need to see the appropriate level of detail, and we can talk a bit more about that, but the appropriate level of detail, we need to see stuff specific to this project, and then, of course, keeping your spelling and grammar errors to a minimal, and then justifying things. So that's just sort of the catch-all, of course, for just is it a good application, or did somebody speed through it and just click submit because it was the last minute type deal? Did you put thought into it, really, is what I think of that one.
Does web grants allow for kind of formatting?
Web Grants does. So the question was, does Web Grants allow for formatting? And it does. I'll show you some different examples of what folks have done. Web Grants will allow you in most of the narrative boxes, I think I've made them so they're rich text, so you can do the bullets like a Word. It's like a little Word document bar at the top where you can do bullets and numbers. Yes, and bullets if you don't know me, which I know you're new, bullets are very much encouraged. Yeah, numbering, that sort of thing. Anything you can do to break up blocks of text, because think about, I'm not even going to call myself, I always call myself out on this, but I always, now depending on my State Trails Advisory Committee folks, but these folks, have full-time jobs, and they get these 70-some applications in March, and are sitting there, in front of your TV at 7 p.m., weeding through so many applications. It's a lot to read. So the more you can sort of call out text and hit key points, the better. Budget is the one place where, we do like to see a lot of detail, and that's if you feel like you want to really be detailed somewhere, that's the place to be very detailed.
Does it allow for images, like graphs or?
Yeah, does Web Grants allow for images? Yes, I think it does. Now that you say that, we'll look at it. I think it does, but certainly you can add those things as attachments as well. So there's a place where there's just a catch-all attachments, and then on the budget forms too, in a couple of the forms, there's a place where if you want to add attachments. And that just sort of reminds me of one thing I would say too is I haven't really incorporated it into the application yet, but it is certainly a good idea to put in photos of the before, especially sort of some of the area, if you're doing maintenance, some of the big areas you think you might address, or it just really helps us to sort of see like the need. Again, I should put that under need, project need, but that really shows what's needed in terms of really see it. You know, we can read it all we want, but when we see just the super rutted out trail that you're like, ugh, I would never want to be on that trail, then you can see, wow, you know, good thing they're going to fix it. Because so anyway, that's a great question. Thank you. Okay. There's just a few extra little pieces that are always tossed around during our funding decisions. So, of course, the amount of RTP funding available is a consideration. That one's kind of silly. But then the bottom two are for folks who are my current grantees. So if you are my current grantee, we'll look at your recent performance as a grantee. So this is kind of going a little bit beyond just are you in compliance, but like have you been struggling? Have you been, you know, have I had to remind you 8 times about every upcoming deadline? There's only 1 or 2 of those, but you know, it happens. So it's not that you won't get funded, it's just that I do toss that out there for the committee to know, like, this person's been great to work with, or this organization just got new leadership and boy, they're struggling. I think they're getting on their feet, but just, you know, just as a heads up. And then the other thing for grantees is we look at the amount of funding that you've expended and how much you have left to expend. So this one's kind of a relative thing, but if you're my current grantee and you've barely expended any of your last 2 years grant and you're coming in for another, you know, grant of a similar sum, my committee is going to look at that and say, but they've barely expended any funds from the last 2 years, and now they're looking at a new grant. You know, if you're doing that, you need to address that in your application as to what's going on with your, you know, in this case it would be what's going on with your 2018 and 2019 grants, and why, you know, if you're mostly expending it, or, you know, then it's no red flags and we don't even look at it. But the committee always does say, well, do they have any grants right now? How much do they have left to expend? And if we say, oh, they've been working on it, and yeah, they had a $40,000 grant and it's down to $20,000 and they're coming in and they're doing requests, that's fine. But if it's one where it's, you know, they had a $45,000 last year, $45,000 this year, and they still have about that much left on the books, and they're like, uh-oh. So just a heads up there for folks that is a big part of the discussion, or it can be. Great. So hopefully, yeah, give me those ones too, especially for anyone really. Once you've sort of gone through, we'll look at those, I think, again this summer and just see how our decisions, hopefully, I think this will make it line up better for everybody, that the decisions and the scoring really are matching a lot better. It's not that they weren't, they were just needed tweaking, really. So hopefully this will just make it a lot clearer what we're expecting and what makes a good application, and then, you know, kind of how things are funded from there. Hasn't changed. Last year I did these priority project areas because my committee called them out. And so the basic thing is on the ground trail work, trail maintenance, trail construction. Again, the more you can do trail related and not just trail side amenities, and not just really it's just trail side amenities. It's hard when it's just that, or we only allow design and maintenance or design and engineering costs up to 20% of your overall project cost, but still the amount to which your trail project can be just on the ground is better. So just keeping that in mind. We had also made mention of the fact that we want projects that will be closed out by the end of the 2020 grant cycle, just because we're not sure of our future funding. So if you're doing a multi-stage project that starts this year and goes into future years, you better at least explain where you're going to get your funding in future years if RTP isn't available. So we know we're not funding, you know, a portion of a project that won't ever see completion. And then we want, you know, we kind of make a nod to the fact that we really want you to have a sustainable maintenance plan identified. That's also in our criteria, so it's kind of redundant now. But and we do make a nod to the folks whose projects have a clear tie to enhancing public safety. So that's really important to the committee. That one, quite honestly, pertains really to the avalanche centers, but certainly if some of your projects have these public safety components where they're really, that's the focus of the project, that's great too. Okay. everyone's favorite part. So this hasn't changed from last year. That's the good news. So anybody who was with me last year, this is not any different. Our environmental review requirements, I should say, our environmental review requirements are the same. So just kind of off the bat, if you are a returning grantee and you're doing the sort of same maintenance on the same forest or ranger districts, you can use that documentation you gave to me last year within the past 3 years, but as we changed all the documentation last year, obviously right now only within the last year pertains. But so if you so if you have the same sort of maintenance style projects in the same ranger districts, and it falls under that umbrella, then you can just upload. I ask that you upload it again. Because it's really hard for me to remember who has that and go back and look. So anyway, so just upload it again, but be sure to put it on. But just make sure you can if you've got that document still, you can just upload that. For everyone else, again, this is just sort of going over the fact that we need to hit MEPA and NEPA requirements, so both state and national Environmental Policy Act requirements. This is a federal highway program, so at the end of the day, it's their agency who's doing the environmental approval. I'm doing it on their behalf. We have this complicated agreement going on, but so that's what we're hitting is those federal highway things. So that's why we sort of redeveloped some of our paperwork last year, because Forest Service needed to make nod to what Federal Highway cared about, really, is they didn't want to play together that nicely, so we kind of came up with that solution. And now it's been going, what we did last year worked well, so we're going to keep on with that. So here's our nod to the fact that if you have something from within the past 3 years, that's something you could use. You could just attach that to your RTP application. So the other example is if you're doing a new trail construction or that sort of thing, and you've had an EA done or some sort of an analysis done from within the last 3 years that's specific, that in which this RTP project fits, that's fine. You can upload that documentation and that can suffice. If it's older than that, a lot of folks say, well, we've got something from, say, DNRC that approved this project, but it's 7 years old because they only do them on 10-year cycles. What I would ask then, and that's this is covered in our tiering section down below, but what I just ask is a revalidation letter from that entity. So they're essentially just saying, yes, all the information contained within that decision or that analysis is still relevant and valid. So reach out to me if that's the case for you and you're not sure what a revalidation letter looks like. They're pretty simple. It's just a matter of reaching out and making sure the agency, the entity, is aware and can get that to you in time for the deadline. Again, my caveat for all these folks with Forest Service and those things, if you're on the public land, you need to be reaching out to that agency to make sure you have their documentation or our form with their signature on it. They're used to that at this point. The Forest Service offices certainly are. The ranger districts, just be mindful of their time. And hopefully we won't have any government shutdowns this year, because that was not fun last year, but we got through it. So keep in contact with me too. I know it's rare, but every so often someone really has a hard time getting in touch with the Forest Service for one way or the other. That's fine. I can help you through that. I've got some contacts too. So, but don't save it. Don't wait till the last minute. That's all. All right, and then here I talk about, this sort of brings you through different project types. The basic ones are if you're doing construction or if you're doing maintenance. There's two distinctions here. There's a distinction there. So if you're doing construction, this tells you about what construction and improvement means versus what maintenance and repair means. So depending, you're going to either fall in number 1 or you're going to fall in number 2, and you're going to need different documentation depending on different level of documentation. So you can kind of identify there which project type you are, or education and awareness, or equipment purchase, but those ones are kind of irrelevant. So once you identify what project type you are, you can come down to this page and find, based on that, if you're a construction and improvement, you're going to need to attach the RTP's 2019 or 2020 EA form or something similar, an environmental analysis form. Usually those are like a big long checklist. I forgot that I'm on the website here. So you'll see all those forms here. And here we have our environmental analysis form. So again, this is for folks doing new stuff, new construction, big improvements, that sort of thing. And this is what our form looks like. There are a lot of EA forms out there. Most of them will suffice just fine. Ours is actually likely a shorter version. Oh, is it on this page? Ha ha ha. I extended my screen, so it's like, okay, yeah. So here's what we're looking at. And this is just, I'm not going to take you through this, but just so you know. So it's going to be this. You're going to give a lot of project detail. You're going to talk about sort of the different types of, you're going to talk about your different alternatives in terms of what type of project, and then you're going to come through and go through these checklists about, is it going to impact geology and soil quality, water quality, that sort of thing. Come through this one. So anyway, it's a little more exhaustive. Well, I shouldn't say a little. It's more exhaustive because this is something that's really affecting the ground, something new, something where you're really digging. You could affect species. You could affect, a lot of things. So that's where you're doing that homework there. And then the other category of project, of course, was maintenance type projects or grooming type projects, where you're not doing anything new, you're just doing essentially kind of box standard sort of things, and that's where you'll come in and you'll use one of the categorical exclusion forms. If you're on Forest Service land specifically, we've created one specific to Forest Service that's just slightly shorter than the other because Forest Service doesn't need all the explanation-y text in there. They know what they're doing. The project, quite honestly, already falls under one of their travel plans or decision notices or whatever big giant things they do. So you can fill out these top two parts, your name, and then your description. They'll do the rest, which is they do this little checklist, and then if they write yes for anything, any impacts, they'll kind of give a little explanation, and then they just put their name and signature. So it's pretty simple. Our forests all saw this last year from folks, so they won't, find it any different this year. Hopefully, it should go just the same. And then our other form, if you're working on private lands or some other land, oops, I just clicked the same one, didn't I? Is just this categorical exclusion form. And this is one I've designed it so you can do it yourself if you need. It takes you through, it's just kind of a glorified checklist, just with a little more explanation about where to find resources to be able to check yes or no. So this one's easy, is does the project involve an acquisition of more than a minor amount of right-of-way? All of you should know off the top of your head, no. But if you're not sure, you definitely want to check, and cadastral is a place where you can check. So again, it takes you through all these and tells you where you can check if you're not sure. Will it have an impact on growth? So it takes you through, I think, 9 of these different little boxes. You just check yes or no, explain if you hit yes that there will be an impact. We just need an explanation, and then sign and date. So
Michelle, in the case,
yeah.
I mean, in our case, we groom both on U.S. Forest Service land and city land. Mm-hmm. So with respect to the city land, I understand we'd have to use this form.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great question, Cliff. If you're grooming or doing maintenance on different landowners' lands, so in Cliff's case, they're working on Forest Service land, but then they're also grooming at the city golf course, then yes, you would need 2 forms, one from Forest Service pertaining to the Forest Service portion of the land, and then you'd need this type of form because that's private and or, that's whatever. It's non-Forest Service land really is what it is. And so any non-Forest Service land, you would use this form. You or somebody at the city, if they were willing, would go through this form and just sort of make nod to the fact that you've considered these impacts. Again, cross-country, any sort of grooming activities are going to be very, very much minimal impact. So really in those ones, it's just a matter of sort of, just kind of going through and making sure. But those ones don't ever really expect to hit any of those. In fact, for the state, snowmobile grooming, at least for MIPA, is an exempt MIPA activity. So you don't even need any sort of documentation from the state side. That said, because we are a federal program, that's why we require it on our side. But that's just an example of it. It's pretty minimal impact. So just really thinking logically and just giving it some thought, really. And what happens is I am the one looking at those. So as we mentioned, those will kind of just check yes or no that you have them for the technical review. I'm the one, though, who's going through, and at the end of the day, it's my review and it's my, I'm the one who's doing the analysis. So I'm using your paperwork as my, you're helping me out in this regard by giving me this paperwork, because I can't do it for 70 projects to make sure they're all up to snuff and going to meet federal highway requirements. So just doing the best you can is what's important here. Certainly reach out to me, especially, the same old story here, but please reach out to me if you're hitting some road bumps or you're not sure. I will help you through. Yeah.
So just an example, and maybe you're not the right person to ask, but we have a old logging roadbed that is a ski trail.
Mm-hmm.
It's an existing roadbed.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's an existing roadbed trail, and our proposed project would be to level it for 200 yards, and we're not expanding the width or really modifying it, except in terms of leveling the surface from side slope to flat roadbed. Because it's an existing trail, this would be potentially considered a maintenance activity.
Yeah, so that was a good question. So that would be a category. That would be a maintenance activity. So the question was, is they have a road that a trail that's an old roadbed, and so leveling that, would that be considered maintenance? And I would say yes. Yeah, any sort of those. It's really, the biggest one the biggest one. The one that's only ever caught people is sometimes like putting in new drainage structures like culverts, not like water bars, but things like culverts, that sort of thing, where you're really obviously going to be tromping in a little drainage and doing that sort of thing. That one is, then we're getting to the point where that's more improvement, bigger construction type thing. But when you're just sort of moving dirt around on a surface level, really, that is a maintenance. So yeah, I would concur with that decision. Yeah, especially since you're in the trail corridor still doing all that work.
So just to be clear, Michelle, this all, like for the construction and environmental analysis, that all needs to be done with the application?
Yes, all the environmental analysis or categorical exclusion forms need to be included with the application. Yep, we need to see that at time of application. And then just so you all know too, a new piece we put in last year was these projects all then get forwarded to, and this is something we just never did in the past, but they get forwarded to our regional biologists and such too. So that they take a look. Last year I didn't get any comments from anybody on any of the projects, but it's certainly a possibility that if you were doing something, and again, these are regional biologists, they have a ton to do, so and it would have to be a big red flag project, but if you're doing something that it's got a big impact environmentally or could really impact elk or something like that, that is another place where I would utilize that resource, and they could possibly say, if you're going to fund it, it's going to be with these restrictions on it, that they can't work at this time or that time, and they need to be mindful of this, that, and the other thing. So that didn't happen. That's never happened before, but it's certainly something that we're trying to do a better job of in terms of speaking with our wildlife folks. And so it's just a heads up that folks, there could be a project where our biologists say, yeah, we can fund it, but they need to adhere to these restrictions. Again, very not common, but could happen. Mostly our biologists are super busy, so unless it's a huge thing, they won't they won't make any comments. Okay, good questions there. And that's kind of, this is honestly, I would consider, along with just making sure your budget's detailed, but this really, in terms of like, it's kind of the hardest part to me because you really, it's not easy. And I say that full well, knowing that last year I came in, or a year and a half ago, I came into the program and we didn't have these forms in place, and Federal Highway was on our case to get better documentation in place. And I quite honestly wasn't super familiar with MEPA or NEPA at this level, and so I get it. It's still a bit nebulous to me and difficult to kind of navigate all that. So do reach out, especially if you're doing one that triggers the environmental analysis form, because that's one where we can work together and make sure you have everything you need. Okay. No. And so, and read through this too. I did, I know it's a lot of, trust me, I'm the first person to say it's a lot of text. It is a lot of text, but hopefully it's useful. I wrote it all, so it's really well written. No.
Of course.
Yeah. Don't you all agree? Yeah. No, but I did write it all, so at least isn't the usual, hopefully, government mumbo jumbo. It's maybe a little more approachable. I don't have a government background, so I try to take all the government stuff I read and translate it into normal people talk. But it's hard because a lot of it is mumbo jumbo to begin with. So here's this whole section about tiering. So a lot of folks, especially Forest Service folks, ask about using decision notices and that sort of thing. And again, that's fine. You can certainly do that as long as this RTP project falls somewhere within that documentation. The biggest thing with those sort of BLM Forest Service, like these huge environmental analyses, whatever, those huge documents, is for me and for you to help me understand where the RTP project is in there, because a lot of these things are like forest level or ranger district level, and I'm trying to look for where it talks about putting in a trail in this one small area. So just helping me, that's basically what this is saying. If you do that, that's fine. Just please make sure to help me look at the document and know where to look, because those things are long, holy moly. And I'm still talk about somebody who's new to environmental analyses. It's hard for me to read. And then there's just a thing saying you need to be aware that you're going to comply with laws and get all your permits, again, for new projects. That's for projects with new construction. That's the big piece. Also for projects with new construction, we don't require you with our environmental analysis form to do that 30-day public involvement period that a lot of environmental analysis forms do. That's because we do it wrapped in, as you've seen, once you submit your application, we have a 30-day public comment period. But it's something that we do encourage, especially if you are working in a city or town or populated area where you might have an effect on a lot of folks, to go ahead and do that on your own, or at least to make nod to what you've done. I mean, I know some folks, for example, are government entities. So what have you done to engage those landowners, especially if there are landowners whose property goes right up to, say, this trailhead you want to put in that has a restroom on it. Not that that's a example nearby, but so making sure that you've kind of alluded to the fact of how you've engaged these landowners to make sure that they're not going to put a big stop or a big hold on a project because all of a sudden they find a latrine's going to go in their backyard or next to their backyard.
Is that something that you could allude to, like, we will do this if funded?
Sure. Yeah, I would find that acceptable. Yeah, because again, it's not a hard requirement for us, so it's one that I just want to know that, quite honestly, the Beatty Street issue isn't going to happen to you, where you, where you get all your plans in place, and then when you go to do construction, a group of landowners comes forward and starts this huge thing. Not that that's good or bad, but just saying that that's something that we'd want to avoid with our RTP funding, because that's something that has turned in. We did fund the latrine for that project, and that's something that's turned into a big, we've gotten a lot of calls and all this stuff, and so we just want to do a better. We did a fine job with that, to be honest, but we want to do a better job. We can be better about making sure our applicants themselves have gone through all the steps they can to ensure landowners are involved. So anyway, we just want to try to avoid those scenarios in the future. So that's sort of our caveat there. We're not going to force you to, certainly, because again, it's very dependent on where you are. If you've got a lot of landowners, that's something we want you to consider. If you don't, then it's probably not super relevant. Or maybe there's just one person, or maybe there's nobody. This section's pretty simple. Give it a read through if you'd like. One other thing I never mentioned, but this year another new thing I did was, again, giving a nod to the fact that not everyone's going to read every single word. I at least tried to, with this kind of blue arrow and bold text, kind of always says on the RTP application. So that's sort of your helpful hint from this section.
Read here.
Yeah, if you're going to read something and you're in a section, probably just at least read that part where it says, be sure your forms are, in this case, be sure your budget. And so there's two forms on the RTP application. There's your RTP budget form and there's your funding strategy narrative form. The RTP budget form is the big chart. If anyone to my current grantees know, it's your big chart, and you're just sort of plugging in your numbers of what your request is going to be for which category of funding, what your match number is going to be for what category. But then your funding strategy narratives, where you're sort of explaining, you're giving your line items and explaining those numbers. So those are your two budget forms. I consider those your two budget forms. So those are the ones that you really want to make sure are detailed and justified, because really we spend a lot of time on those forms. Probably the most time at our STAC committee meeting is spent on those forms, looking at what your numbers are and where they came from. So the extent possible, I know, again, for new trail construction in particular, it's really tough to know exactly what your budget numbers are going to be, but to the extent you can, kind of itemizing those out, with the understanding from me that you and I might work in the future to tweak those numbers as you move forward and a contract actually comes in and it's way higher than you thought or whatever. So the only piece from here, we talked about a lot of it, and we'll talk a little bit more about the specific pieces. Budgets get real specific real quick, so there's not a ton to say on budgets overall. But we'll talk a bit about our purchasing requirements. That's anybody who is getting a material or services from a single vendor over $5,000 needs to follow the state procurement policy. And we can get to that section, but that's not something you need to do at the time of application, but it's something that you're understanding you are going to do before you make any purchases for which you're going to get RTP reimbursement.
That includes the services there, so
Mm-hmm.
if you're paying a contractor to do the work over $5,000,
Mm-hmm.
you got to follow that.
You have to follow that, and we'll talk, because there's a lot of times where there's a sole vendor with whom you're going to work. I think that's why you are bringing that up. There's a lot of time where there's one vendor because the snowmobile club who works next door is going to give you their piston bully, or is going to come, use their piston bully on your lands, and you're going to pay them. So that's one where you can just make a nod on your first reimbursement request, just kind of write up a couple sentences about the fact that the reason you selected this vendor is they are obviously the cheapest. Anyone else's would be prohibitively expensive because they don't have travel costs or anything like that associated. And then we talk a bit about match requirements. The biggest piece with the match requirement, we already talked about the levels of match funding, and again, this gets super specific super quick, so just I can always work with you if you're not sure on your own budget, but just be aware that match is just like RTP expenses. It needs to be an eligible RTP activity, and again, we talked it needs to be from within your project start date. If it's before that, it can only be design and engineering costs. What else? That's basically it. When you're applying, you're guaranteeing your match for us. So this is one where, again, if you're hitting that match requirement, so if you have some pieces above that match requirement in particular that you're not sure if you're going to get, or you're not sure you're going to get that many volunteers, again, the most guaranteed, the best. So just be aware that we're looking at that, and we want to see that you have that guaranteed. And then here we talk about, just for some of my committee members, it's really a sticking point that folks get right. We have two different kinds of match. There's sponsor funds, or cash match is the two terms are used interchangeably. I try to use cash match because I think it's a little more understandable, but that's your cash you're bringing to the project, your donated professional services, donated funds, donated materials, that sort of thing. Your in-kind's really that volunteer labor that's coming to the project. So you'll see the two separate columns, so that's why I call that out, so if you need that. Cool. We already talked about all this. We already talked about using volunteer hours as match. That one got really bright green, didn't it? We already talked about calculating match. Oh, one nice thing that's new this year with calculating match. So unfortunately, I can't make, listen, if I could change maybe one thing, it would probably be to be able to have web grants calculate your match requirement for you, and then flag you if you didn't hit it. That sounds like a simple ask, but it's not possible. So you have to do it yourself. But one thing I did do was I redid this how to calculate match sheet, which I never found useful, and hopefully made it into something somewhat useful. And basically it's a repeat of what that was, but it gives you the formulas. But more importantly, you can just type in your RTP request, and it will tell you right here your minimum match requirement. So it's doing that calculation for you. So it's a good place if you're really not sure about math and really just want to get some validation. You can ask me, but you can also just ask this form. And then even better, I think, for Forest Service, they're the ones, the federal entities are the ones who have to deal with the 5% non-federal match, and that's really, really annoying to calculate, quite honestly. But they're federal, so who cares? But anyway, they can put in their 50,000, and then if they're bringing, I don't know the right ratio, but if they're bringing, what should I say, 10, right? Whatever, something like that, $10,000 in federal match, then they can see that they're going to need to bring an additional 3,200 in. So anyway, not useful for most of you, this part, but this part you can use. Or again, I'll do the calculation for folks too. So you can just shoot me an email or call me, and I don't mind. I like math. It doesn't bother me. That's easy. I like answering easy questions too sometimes. Those ones are easy. Okay, so where were we? So there's, hopefully folks will find that. Oh God, that's too bright. So that goes over that goes over the 5%. Ugh, the indirect cost rate. I probably shouldn't make that noise while I'm being recorded. But indirect cost rate, you'll notice there are certain things that I like to breeze over because I don't know a lot about them, and this is one. So this is one I'm bringing this up because in the past, this is a change. I guess I could have included it in the changes part. But in the past, we've sort of told folks, no, you cannot use an indirect cost rate. So just for folks, or not that you cannot, but whatever, we've discouraged it in the past, I should say. And basically so right now we're talking about direct versus indirect costs. So just to kind of clarify here, direct costs are those that are directly associated with your project. So the main clarification point, of course, all the in the field stuff's super obvious, but another piece of clarification is if you're working at home but you're contacting Forest Service to get these contracts in place, and you're working to get volunteers on board who are going to work on your RTP project, that sort of thing, that's all directly related to the project, right? The project cannot happen without you doing those pieces, regardless of whether you're in the field or not. So the difference here is indirect costs are those kind of like things that are more associated with your organization. So what are some good examples? Somebody toss out some good examples. You guys probably know better than I do.
Overall general liability for your organization.
There we go. Yes, general liability, maintaining facilities, administrative salaries, that sort of thing. I mean, yeah, that sort of thing. So those are indirect costs. So what we used to tell people in the past was, just don't. And then we realized it was brought to our attention, and or we realized, I don't remember which, but it was brought to my attention that we needed to fix that in our guidelines because we can't tell folks, everybody has a right to use it, is the answer. Everybody has the right to use an indirect cost rate if they want. So there's a lot of complication with it, though. It's not just as simple as, oh, you put this little percentage on and you're good. There's a ton about it. So this goes through a lot of that. My compliance person wrote this for me, so I didn't write this, so don't hold me to the fact that it's confusing. So either, there's a couple scenarios, though, and you'll either be an entity who's already got a federally approved indirect cost rate. You'll know if that's you. If you don't, if you're thinking, is that me? That's a no. But, those are those usually larger, of course, more organized organizations. And that's what you may use is your federally approved indirect cost rate. And then you need to sort of let us know what costs are included under that indirect cost rate and use it consistently and all that sort of thing. The more likely is that you would use the de minimis rate. So if you're a non-federal entity and you don't have a federal indirect cost rate, any of this stuff, you're sitting there going, what? This is you. You have never received a cost rate. You can elect to use a 10% indirect cost rate. But there's some caveats to that too. First of all, we need to work with you to establish exactly what is covered under that indirect cost rate, what you're going to use, and then it needs to be used consistently in all of your federal awards from that point forward. So if you're, working with us over several years, or if you're, and using any other federal program, you're going to have to use that same indirect cost rate in that same way. So that's where I say it gets complicated real quick. So if you're interested, and you don't have to, so if you're interested in using that, just let me know and we can figure how that works into your budget and also make sure that we've sort of got this. But just kind of shoot me an email or something and we can have a talk and I can essentially connect you with my compliance person because as you can see, I'm not the expert. I'm kind of the message bearer on this one.
We're thinking of hiring a groomer this year and we're weighing our options on how to go with liability insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Would that go under what you're talking about? We're going to have to buy a liability policy for him.
I know, and this gets a little complicated because for some of your projects, the insurance, like in that case, the insurance is very project specific. It's not necessarily organizationally specific, So I think in your case, I would say that might even be a direct cost because I know, Cliff, I think you use that as match, right?
Well, we have
the liability.
I'm not sure we have an officer general liability umbrella, if you will, kind of call it a board and officer level. Well, it's basically a policy that covers
your club,
anything
the
members do. If the groomer runs over a skier and kills him, theoretically that might be covered. But it's sort of a general liability umbrella for the entire organization.
Okay.
On the other hand, we also have specific insurance for our snow machines, which would be more direct.
Yeah, that one is. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say.
Also if you're paying somebody, you're going to have to buy workers' comp insurance.
Yes.
And that would be very specific as well.
Mm-hmm.
If that person's activity is related to the project, in the case of a groomer, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, and so in that case, like when it comes to salaries, we certainly, I haven't yet been told that we'll just blanket cover the salary, right? So in that case, that's kind of a similar thing where, right, that's directly related to that person doing that specific job, which is an RTP. So so I think you're right that I would make the distinction between the snow machine insurance versus just the club insurance. I guess would be the distinction there.
And I think another distinction would be, if you're paying a groomer's salary, that would be a cash cost. If you're paying the general organizational costs, like an accountant to
Mhm.
process the payroll
Exactly.
for that person. That's a organizational
Yeah.
related. It's kind of like having staff salary.
Yeah.
For the administrative assistant as opposed to
Mhm.
the person that's out there running the machines.
Yeah, so I would generally agree. Yeah, and that, again, this gets gray really quickly, and that's why, yeah. So anyway, we don't, again, none of our organizations really use this right now, but it's just something that we're informing you this is something you could use. So if you're really interested, do let me know. And that is...
That was your foot.
That was okay.
We're even.
Yeah, we are even. No.
Does the review committee look, is there any like penalty to putting in an IDC?
No, well, so that was, I was just about to say, the question was, is there a penalty to using an IDC, an indirect cost rate? And the answer is there legally cannot be. So no, you can use it, you can not use it. We can't, if we fund your project, we cannot strike that line item. It's there or it's not there. So it's just, it's a choice thing. It's a choice thing. So, yeah.
This is a question about match
Mhm.
and volunteer hours. I think the last time I attended a training, it was made very clear that volunteer hours are for trail maintenance, trail construction activities at the trail facility,
Mm-hmm.
at the trail system,
Could be, as opposed to
Yeah.
what?
as opposed to the hours that a volunteer treasurer puts in to keep the books for the organization.
Yeah, well, so
That's
again, it
correct.
needs to be directly related to the project. So, I mean, that said, if you had a volunteer in the office calling the Forest Service to set up the agreements and doing that sort of thing, and that was somebody volunteering their time, that's,
Okay.
yeah, that's fine. It's just,
Okay.
again, it needs to be, it can't be, but it can't be somebody doing overall project. We're saying overall club activities. If someone's doing some fundraising or if someone's reaching out for general volunteers for the year for you, again, it needs to be specific to this RTP project.
Sure.
But it can be somebody doing work in the office. That's fine, as long as it's like that, where it's directly tied in with this project.
So time spent filling out web grants and submitting the web grants. I mean, because
There,
I
I know.
staying in compliance, maintaining the DUNS account or transferring DUNS accounts and SAM stuff. I mean, I found it to be a huge time sink. I mean,
It is a huge
like
time sink.
100 hours of volunteer efforts,
But
but it's not.
Don't put it as match because
It's
they'll
not
say,
eligible.
you know.
Yeah. So here's where we get in. So we're, just for folks on the phone, if you didn't hear, we're asking about using, say, time in web grants to, I'm going to also guess, like submit claims and to do your SAM and your DUNS registration and re-registration. That's where we get into the really gray and to where I like to tell people, most people have enough match, first of all, number one. So if you have enough match, can we avoid that, please? Because it does get gray really quick. Basically, how we have been treating that is that's a no. That's a no because, well, for the salmon duns, while you are carrying it for this specific RTP project, it's something that you just generally have to do as a federal grantee. And these are federal dollars, but you could have to do that. I don't know. You could have to do that for another program. So that's kind of the rationale there. And then the web grants part, yeah, we start getting gray really quickly. And so I just will say, leave it up to you to sort of pick the best, most direct match. And if you're getting down that far down the totem pole, let's have a talk about your sort of your way forward there. Just because we kind of want to avoid getting too far down that line because it really does starting to get really indirect really quickly. And in the meaning is that this match is really directly related to this project. That's the intention of this program. So we're starting to get into some really kind of like, in my head, kind of sidey stuff there when you're kind of getting there. So the idea is honestly that for any project like a trail project, you're out there, doing 20% of the work. And I know the submitting grant and doing the claim, but that's related not really to the project, that's related to the grant administration, if that makes sense. I know Mona feels very differently than I do.
If your only employees are groomers that are specific to the project,
Mhm.
then payroll spent doing those only employees would be eligible match.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I also believe that my question, and I guess in this way, the web grants doesn't fall, but in this way, that example, I would say, would you just have to ask if this award wasn't there, what would you be doing? You know, if you would still have some of those people on staff, then, you know, again, so it's just something, I don't know. If you're getting that far, then let's talk about it. This is where I talk about, though, we're meeting the 20% match requirement. So if you're having a hard time meeting that and we're going to need to start to pull some of those things, that's okay, but let's talk about it. Hopefully there's some more direct things, because really, again, the intention of the program is that you are able to put up some really direct match that, you know, that's really holding up, you know, and matching the project funds.
The only thing, and I have to say this, you would know I would.
I know.
The time spent writing, doing the actual web grant on site is not that much,
Mm-hmm.
but the time you put into completing all the challenge cost share reports, because you have to do at least 2 a year on
Yep.
those, plus you do all your status reports. Those are the things that really take. It's like all of a sudden out of the middle of everything you're doing, those come up.
Yeah.
And we do have 2 employees on one grant, and they are the only paid employees we have. And so the grant does cover the cost of the payroll program and that for
Mhm.
them, but
Mhm.
because we don't have anybody else we pay, so.
Yeah, and you wouldn't if it
No.
weren't for this.
No.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get into this, but I did have a question about project coordination costs. So like somebody specifically being paid to coordinate the project, including reporting as well as for a construction grant.
So project coordination costs, that'll get tough, because again, you'll first and foremost, you need to show me that person is, you need to be able to say that person's specific to this RTP project, and they're not just or if you're, then you can choose a portion of their time, right, for which they'll be coordinating the project. But I would want to delineate out, again, I would prefer that the web grant side of working, you know, on the grant management itself versus the project management be separated, and that the grant management aspect of the project is not, in my head, considered a direct cost. Yeah. So, but yeah, the project management, and for me, reporting on the challenge cost share, whatever it's taking for you to uphold that challenge cost share agreement, that is specific, because I know without this RTP funding, you wouldn't have those agreements in place. So, you know, so whatever's specific to holding up that challenge cost share agreement, you know, that I can see. But when we're talking about just the grant management of just managing the grant on your end, that's kind of gray to me. That's not the project, that's the grant. And I know then you get gray really quickly where, well, what's grant, what's the project? But when you're specifically in web grants, uploading documents, typing into the status report, but our web grant status report should take you 10 minutes, so it's not like that's a huge time suck, hopefully. The claim, so I understand, yeah. Trust me, I'm the one who reviews them, so.
Well, and that doesn't have to do with the website. That has to do with all of your stuff you have to get together and get it in order.
And that's when I just will say that, I'm being recorded right now, aren't I? Darn it. But, you know, project administration, if you can just, what did we say with you? It was project management.
Yeah, don't say administration.
Yeah, don't say administration, but if
Federal Highways doesn't like
just, yeah, you can put time as project management, and just you be a good steward of what that, you know, just, it's up to you. You know, there's a point to which I'm not going to delve into I'll delve into a lot of the things you do, but I won't delve into every little piece of what you do. So, so just know that that's my thoughts on it, but, you know, We'll just kind of leave it there. And if you're really scratching for match, just let me know, and that way I can work with you a little more too on how to craft things, so that maybe there's more there that you just don't realize. More kind of direct expenses, or things that are easier, that sort of thing. So just reach out if you're really scrounging for match to meet that. And I get it. It's not everybody is going to, I know I keep saying, oh, everybody matches way beyond the 20%, but some of you might not. I know, so we'll talk about, what could work for you. But it is a big, important part of the program. So, and it is what it is. It's 20%. Okay. So and again, reach out to me with that indirect cost rate if you're interested in using it, and we can go through that. And I know I say I don't know a lot about it, but that's fine. My job is to step through that and figure it out with you. So reach out and we will figure it out. I just don't know a ton right now, so don't ask me a ton of questions. Okay, so just quickly now, just again, this is the back of your head. You don't need to do this at the time of application, but you're just knowing that if you're purchasing a service, contracting, purchasing materials, that sort of thing from one vendor, over $5,000, I'm going to need to see that you followed the state's procurement policy. And what I mean by I'm going to need to see that is on your first claim with that vendor, that service on it, you're going to need to submit your documentation that you've done this. So it's pretty simple for the limited solicitation process. That's between $5,000 and just right up to $25,000 of a service or of a contract. If that's what you're expecting, then you go through the limited, which is you're just reaching out to 3 different vendors to get 3 quotes. And then you choose the lowest one, and if you don't choose the lowest viable quote is the word, if you don't choose the lowest viable quote, you give me some sort of explanation as to why.
If you put out for 3, but you don't get 2 back, you just show the documentation that you...
Yeah, so do what you can to get 3. Again, you're soliciting, so hopefully you can reach it, but I know you can email folks and they just never respond to you, or you can call and they never get back to you. So do what you can to reach out to 3 or at least 3. And then, I'll need a justification too, or just an explanation if you were only able to receive 2, or if there's only 2 vendors in your area, or if you only have one person who really honestly is going to be able to do the work at the cost you need because they're the next door neighbor, your friendly neighborhood snowmobile club, then that's fine. So that's pretty simple. And all you're giving to me with your claim is you're just giving me, usually in this case it's just a little Word document or narrative piece that says what you did, whom you contacted, what the quote was, and then any explanation if you didn't get 3 or if you went with a higher than the lowest. But again, remember, you're essentially going through the same process the state does, and as a government entity, we have to pick the cheapest. So the idea is if you're not picking the cheapest, why? Competitive bid process is, of course, much more involved. That's if you're expecting a contract, a service, material above $25,000, you have to kind of do the more involved route. So the biggest piece is you have to you have to put out a request for bids or proposals, and you have to undergo a 21-day solicitation process, and that needs to be noticed in a paper of general circulation, that 21-day. So you put out this request for proposals, you go through that process, and then you document which bids you received, which proposals you received, and then which you chose, and if it's not the lowest, why. That one, you might only receive 1 bid. That's actually pretty common. That's fine. You don't need to justify because you did this proposal process, so you don't need to justify how many you got. You just need to justify if you didn't choose the lowest.
Engineering services bumped up to $50,000?
Oh, yeah, probably. That's a good point. You can tell I'm not an expert on that either, can't you? I think you're right. I do remember that. Yeah, so if you're, I was going to say, you city and county folk might be more knowledgeable about this than I am. Let me.
We can talk about today, but we have our own
Okay.
procurement policy that's liable under state government.
Okay.
It's $80,000 for us, yeah.
Okay.
On equipment, not services though, for engineering.
Okay, that is a good point. And my other point too that I need to add to this that I forgot is anybody, I don't know about here, this group, but anybody using MCC, Montana Conservation Corps, that's sort of youth corps, those are exempted from this, so you don't need to, for your $10,000 MCC contract, I mean, there's only one youth corps, so we don't need to see an explanation for that purchase. Let me make a note of the fact that I need to beef this up a little bit with the engineering piece. No, you're right. I just, you can tell I don't procure, so gosh, this has been a hard one for me to become an expert on. Gosh.
This would be considered like a direct project management, though, if you were having to do procurement.
Yeah.
Can be very time-consuming.
Mm-hmm. It can. Yeah, and so I honestly, you can all obviously tell with my level of understanding, I'm just checking off that the steps are followed. My federal highway person also looks at that too, though. That said, he's never, in the last year, we had a new person come on about a year ago now, and we've had a few competitive bid folks documentation claims come through over the summer, and I thought they looked fine, and based on all these pieces, and he agreed. So it is complicated, but it isn't in some ways. For us, it's more just checking off the boxes that you did all these pieces. Hopefully that's, I don't know, there's probably like some procurement person at the state, like, really.
I'll just make one more comment because
Yeah.
I think it is an important one. So appreciate the lowest acceptable bid, and this is in federal statute, that if there is a known history of a vendor or contractor not being acceptable or doing acceptable work, that is certainly part of that procurement decision.
Well, and
It can be a really important one.
And to me, I guess that makes sense, and that would to me come in with the kind of what constitutes an acceptable bid, and it's like this vendor's history has shown that.
So I should say it's allowable in both states.
Okay, great. That is a good caveat too. And that's something that honestly, again, you're providing me narrative too when you don't choose the lowest, and that's something that quite honestly, even without you saying that, I would have seen that from somebody and probably been like, I've never seen that, but certainly is something that I would just think, well, that seems acceptable to me.
Me too.
Yeah. Great. Okay, Buy America, hopefully, well, I don't know, we do have some cross-country ski grooming folks in the room here, so Buy America hasn't changed our Buy America requirement. So for anyone unfamiliar, if you have a iron and steel contained, you are purchasing iron and steel for your RTP project. It's contained within a piece of equipment, it's contained within culverts, it's contained within shed, roofing, that sort of thing. You need to be cognizant of this. So it's saying that the Buy America requirement is that any steel iron components contained within your project are valued at less than $2,500. If not, then we need to see justification from the manufacturer that those are USA made, those components. Gosh, darn it. I need to move this. Here, well, I don't know why I don't just put it over here. Let's put it over there. Okay. God, that scares me. Okay. So anyway, so this is most applicable to my ski grooming folks who are buying groomers. We, of course, everybody in this room I'm sure knows, right now Arctic Cat is the only one who can document adequately that they meet Buy America requirements. Other than that, the other pieces are a little easier. I have a couple projects where they're buying enough culverts that it triggers that it gets above 2,500. But in all those cases, folks are using some sort of local vendor like Bridger Steel or someone where it's easy. They're American-made steel and they can give you a quick little letter. So that one's like the state procurement thing where I'm just going to look for that. You don't need that necessarily with your application, although it certainly does help, at least some nod to the fact that you're aware of this requirement and will be using a vendor who can provide USA made steel or iron. But you also need to submit that documentation with your claim on that item. So that's where I'll need to see just a statement from the manufacturer saying the iron and steel contained within whatever is American made.
So you need to see, I mean, I know from our specific case, it's not relevant to my current situation, but even if it's less than 2,500, you have to have a statement from the manufacturer saying
Nope.
it's less than 2,500.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, that's true. So the question is if it's less than 2,500, and that's what the Arctic Cat letter actually says, right? That's what you're getting at. Is their letter says the iron and steel components contained within this item are valued at less than $2,500.
Well, not only that, but they had to specifically itemize the cost of the steel.
Yeah.
And show that.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to go to their supply chain and basically ask the engineers to quantify it.
Yep.
Because the federal highway people weren't satisfied with we're less than $2,500. They wanted to see the number broken down.
Yep.
Which seemed like overkill. So I mean that's not stated here, but I mean if somebody's trying to buy a new Bearcat,
okay, it's
got to be more detailed than just something saying less than 2,500 because at least that didn't satisfy the highway department 2 years ago.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and quite honestly, it's been variable about what they will accept. And this, though, is a requirement that we are, it's not going away, and it's only going to get worse. Yeah. It's never going to go away in our foreseeable future. It's only going to get worse. And so it's just something to really be aware of. And the hardest one is with those Arctic Cats and the grooming machine. So just work with me if you know you want to purchase a grooming machine. That's one where I'll reach out and you and I can have a conversation. So when the application comes up for review, we can chat about it, and I can tell the committee that this person's aware, and we'll work through it. Just for the future, what we're going to try to do, and this will depend. We still aren't sure if we can, but we will try, hopefully, to be able to fund those through the state program, so we don't have to worry about Buy America any longer. However, we're not sure yet if the state program, if it's written in the bill quite right, and I don't know who's the person who's supposed to tell me if it is or not, but we still have to do that research just to see that that's possible, because it's not specifically written equipment, but anyway. I will get back to you, but we would like to get away from funding any of these through rec trails because it's so annoying. So annoying.
You probably face the same thing with a piston boat, don't you?
Well, we don't purchase those. No,
you don't.
Only through the state program through the state snowmobile program do we purchase that stuff. So we are the only program within Fish, Wildlife, and Parks that purchases any sort of equipment. And like I said, the culverts, that sort of thing's a lot easier because that's from Bridge or Steel or whoever, and they're right there and it's easy. But it's really really the grooming machines. That's the hard one. Yeah.
Does that include used equipment?
That includes used equipment, yes. Yes, all used equipment must also meet this requirement. So basically that's saying used equipment, you're out of luck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're out of luck.
Yeah. It's really a bummer, but again, this is all my federal stuff. I'm just going to say it is what it is, and I didn't make it up.
Michelle, if you get time after you go through this,
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about this upcoming state trails program?
Yes, I can. Yeah, and I'm aware we're only 20 minutes away, but I'm happy to stay for a while after too, and we can continue talking or talk about that and whatever. I'm right at home here, so yeah. Anyway, so just let me know if you're not sure on that. Equipment purchases, if you purchased any of our equipment before, you'll know, like this just recently, our compliance officer, she reached out, I think, to a lot of folks to just kind of see where our equipment is and what's happening with RTP equipment. So you gotta guarantee it for its life cycle. You can't sell it within 5 years, that sort of thing. So I think a lot of you are really familiar, in fact, more so than me, which is why I'm breezing through it. And then just knowing that we need to see a maintenance plan with your equipment when you submit an application. So in that case, your maintenance portion of your application, we're going to look at how are you going to take care of that equipment over the years and make sure it's adequately maintained. Yeah. Anyway, just review that if you're purchasing equipment. Some good pieces there. So ADA accessibility, it's another piece that I'm not super great on, quite honestly. Just the crux of this is you should seek all opportunities to be inclusive in your trail design. So this is obviously specific to those designing trail, but we will look to see and we will want to see that you've done what you can reasonably to include folks, of course, with trailhead design sort of things, that is those ADA accessible restrooms and places where folks with disabilities could park. Those are kind of the most clear ones, and then, going on from there. So if you've got questions, just read this through. There isn't any sort of hard lines with RTP right now, so just read this through. It's certainly no different than any other county or city sort of regulations on this, so nothing kind of breaking the mold here. We always have our chat, of course, about trail surface considerations. So a lot of folks this is a section. We used to have this chart in our old application where we kind of tried to calculate for folks what it costs to put in a gravel trail per mile and maintain a gravel trail per mile and put in an asphalt trail per mile and maintain. And, and doing some research, I'm no expert, but doing some research this past year and hearing from folks, it's just something that we can't really put a blanket number on. So if you're considering putting resurfacing a trail, it's really in your best interest to, with acknowledgement of the state procurement policy that you'll have to go through later, but reaching out to folks, to vendors, to see what something in your area might cost, reaching out to local trail groups who have done something similar to see what that costs for them, and then also taking into consideration those differences in the trail surface. A big thing and a big reason for this section, of course, is some folks want to put in asphalt trails and the questions surrounding that. And that's something that we can fund. Traditionally, quite frankly, the State Trails Advisory Committee has been, what some folks term anti-paving. I have not been around that long, so I haven't seen that as much as others, but I certainly could see that being the case. So we're working with our State Trails Advisory Committee to make sure that on our application we're asking the right kinds of questions for folks who want to put in asphalt so that they're feeling comfortable with the level of detail, because they are more expensive projects, of course. So we need just some more details and some more information about the numbers and that sort of thing. So if you're interested in a paving project, it's a good idea to reach out just so we can make sure that we're on the same page and that you're doing what you can to give enough numbers and the detail that the committee will be willing to consider the project, because we've kind of seen it across the board. I've seen a couple what I thought were decent applications come in, but a couple that just really didn't give any detail about the paving, what type, what was the maintenance going to be on it, because those are, of course, as folks who do it know, those are really important considerations when it comes to if that's going to be a successful paving project or not. So reach out if that's the case for you, and we can make sure you're hitting all those important pieces, so those unknowns are sort of answered. All right. Winter grooming is pretty simple. A lot of you are very familiar in this room, so we've already talked about it. And just a reminder of what I kind of called out here, what our reimbursement rates are meant to cover. So the fuel, oil, and general maintenance and repairs on a machine. So if you're using a grooming rate for a specific machine, which is how it kind of should work, you should kind of have identified you're going to use the grooming rate for this machine or that machine, then that's what I shouldn't be seeing receipts for those. You're just using your grooming log to tally the hours for which the machine's out there, and that's how you're going to get your reimbursement. Anything beyond those kind of general things for running the machine are what you can kind of submit to me separately as separate cost. Or if you have a machine that you're running for the club that you're not including under this reimbursement rate, whose hours you're not coming into me for reimbursement, that one you could, someone's like, well, what if we have to repair our ski-doo that we, use for grooming this other part, like, okay, that you can kind of consider those too. That should be in your funding strategy narrative of something that we're going to fund for you. But that's something that we could, that's an eligible expense, I should say. And make sure when you're doing your applications to show the breakdown of how you've calculated your grooming costs. And I think everyone in this room does a good job, but just, it's hard if someone just says, oh, we're going to have a grooming cost of $20,000 over 2 years. And it's like, well, how did you come up with that number? I mean, that's a lot of hours. So, if you can show your hours, expected hours, of course, by month or that sort of thing, that's really useful. That's a useful way for the committee to look at it and be able to understand where you got your number from. Because it's really easy to just put in a number and say, sounds good. But it's better practice to itemize that number if you can.
Excuse me. So just to understand, this is in reference to match dollars?
No, that's for grooming.
Okay.
For expenses, yeah. It could be for match as well.
Well, I'm just saying if one wanted to, if you had an equipment repair expense of $1,000 cash cost, is that an eligible match potentially?
That it would depend if that was an eligible match. If it's general maintenance, although $1,000 sounds like maybe, I don't know. I don't know a ton about grooming machines. If it's what you would consider just general maintenance of that machine, then no. If we're including that machine under the reimbursement rate, then no, that should be rolled in with that. That's what we're reimbursing you for under the rate. If it's not a general, if it's kind of much more of just something happened to that machine,
broke,
then sure. The other piece that I forgot to mention is that a lot of folks forget, but hopefully now we're getting the word out, is that the costs of the operator running the machine are not included in that, so that can be used as match. That's a really easy thing to actually use as match in terms of if you got a volunteer up there, they can essentially just sign the sheet that has the hours on it, right? We can kind of work that out because that's a new thing that we need the signature, but still you can get that name and have them sign the hours sheet, and then you got their match documented. Or if you're paying that person, we either can have that be an RTP expense if you write it in your budget, or we can use that as match too. Either way. So again, that's just the machine's reimbursement rate, not the operator. The operator isn't included, or operators if you have two. Okay. We're getting close to the end here, both this document and this. So what I think we'll do, because we're getting towards the end, I'll sort of wrap this document up, which I said we're getting close, and then if anybody wants to stay and talk more about the application, I'll pop into the application real quick here, but if you want to stay, talk more about the application, talk more about the upcoming state program, I am here, so I'm not going anywhere, but maybe to the bathroom for a second, but that's it. Okay, so salaries, this is pretty simple, nothing's changed. First of all, there's a caveat of when it comes to your salary and labor costs, we ask that only 20% of your overall costs come from that sort of project oversight. That's super ambiguous. But we're talking about that like project management type stuff that we kind of just talked about. So this is just a general statement. I'm honestly never really holding anyone to this. I actually didn't realize it existed until like a few months ago, to be honest. It was in our guidelines. But that's a nod to the fact that most of your project costs should be that on the ground work, and a portion of it should be kind of that background in the office type stuff. trail stewards, this is just a thing for Forest Service folks specifically, and anyone, if you're claiming a salary or a portion of somebody's salary, this is just a reminder that along with the sort of itemized putting the, we're going to fund a trail steward salary or, a project manager salary, giving a sort of synopsis of what portion of that salary is going to be attributed, like what's attributable to the RTP project that person's doing, because the committee isn't aware of how you're titling your positions and that sort of thing. Another important consideration is a lot of folks actually write in some of their CEO, not CEO. What's it called? Yes, executive director. That was the word I'm looking for. Thank you. Some people do actually write in their executive directors, a portion of their executive director's time. Of course, these are really small organizations, and the executive director is working very specifically on this project, getting volunteers, doing these sort of things with the forest to get the agreement set up. That's fine, but you can understand how just writing in executive director salary, as a line item is a major red flag until you tell us what pieces of that salary this RTP is meant to fund, and then the committee will, consider it along with everything else. So just be very aware that we're not always sure of what your titles mean and what they're doing. So add some explanation about what piece we're funding and why of that person's salary. And that's just the same thing. We talked about the planning, design, and engineering costs being not exceeding 20% of the match, or 20% of the total project cost. That's fine. We talked about, the page down too much. We were almost done anyway, but we'll come back up. Oh yeah. So, and then our last thing I think was our travel costs here. So here's where you'll find, I think, a pretty good, a better explanation than we used to have, I'll say it that way, of our travel-related costs and how you could use them either in your budget as match or as expenses. So here's what we can allow for travel reimbursements. We can do vehicle mileage, meal allowances. We could either do meals by receipt or by per diem, so that's up to you how you want to do that. By receipt meaning at cost for whatever it actually costs the person. We could do lodging reimbursement. Again, all these are specific to the project. And then we can reimburse at a rate the use of personal properties like trailer and stock. And then this just takes you through all the pieces. And as Mona kind of pointed out, and we pointed out, this will be something that is used, it's documented, and you have a big form, and it's kind of an onerous documentation process. So just being aware that that will be the expectation if you have these in your budget. That's fine. And then going through for your claim, we'll work to make sure you understand exactly what's needed in terms of the person logging their hours and the vehicle miles and where they started, where they ended. Again, these are they're not exact, but they need to be noted and having a signature and all that. So anyway, yeah, here we say vehicle mileage is 0.58 per mile. That's also true now if you're using, if you're a current grantee, that changes sort of for everybody going forward. So 0.58 is our vehicle rate. We have, again, meals by receipt. You can do that for either if you're buying groceries for a crew that RTP is funding. That's, obviously that's the easiest way to usually do those. Or you can do, if a crew leader is traveling to their RTP project site, and they have lunch. There's time ranges to be aware of, which is why we need we need their times they left and times they departed to make sure they fall within and just read it. They have to fall within that time period, and they have to have been traveling for at least 3 hours and all this silly stuff. But for the budget for your RTP application, you don't need to get into that much detail. Just knowing that and being able to roughly calculate what you're gonna incur. Those are reimbursement rates if you're using the per diem. They went up this past January, which was very exciting for us state employees. And then lodging, you have to use reimburse lodging using our state rate. So here this shows the standard rate, and then certain areas at certain times of the year have a slightly higher than the standard rate. So we can't reimburse above those amounts for lodging if somebody's traveling for some reason. And then here's the caveat too for folks, if someone's staying at a non-receivable lodging facility, so in their tent or camper, that's fine. We can only reimburse that, though, $12 an hour, but we can still reimburse something on that. Okay, and then here's our personal property. So boats, not really relevant, but horse trailers or horses and pack animals are on there as well. And I think that's our last little piece. Land acquisitions and easements. Talk to me if you're going to do. We can fund our land acquisitions and easements are eligible to fund with RTP funds. It's just really difficult. So let me know. It's very rare. Most of you, we're not going to talk about that. It's not useful. And that's it. We've got just a bunch of appendices, but they're all very much specific and they're tagged within the text. So if you're reading text and you need more, it's there. So that's our guidelines, and that's kind of the crux of everything in terms of the program and the new stuff and the old stuff. Like I said, at this point, I am happy to, we're out of time in terms of the official time frame. I believe I have this room reserved until 1 anyway, and I'm happy to stick around that long, or 10 minutes, whatever. I can go through the application online a little bit for folks, or we can talk a little bit about the state program. So basically what I'm saying is I won't feel bad at this point if you leave the room. I wouldn't have felt bad anyway, quite frankly, but you can leave the room at any time. But if you have to go, or if you want to go because you're over it, that is totally fine. Same to you folks on the phone. I've seen a couple people already, I'm sure, have meetings or whatnot, or lunch dates they need to hit, so that's fine.
Before we break up, I'm curious, has anybody heard anything about the status of a U.S. Forest Service RAC grant this year?
A what, Clint?
Resource Advisory Committee grant process. Have you heard anything about that? Availability thereof?
I can say something about that. It depends upon which RAC region. For example, I know that the Flathead RAC has already met and solicited applications, but there are other RACs that are still getting a quorum or and soliciting for new memberships so that they can organize and get that. But there's 2017 and 2018 money in the line. Secure Rural Schools was rechartered almost a year ago now, but it's up to that RAC region, the leader of that RAC region, whether or not they have put the pieces in place to move things forward.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Carol. That was Carol Treadwell answering.
Jeff, do you know what flat dollars can be used in conjunction with trail?
Yeah. I don't remember off the top of my head right now. But if you want,
Great.
yeah.
So Michelle, regarding this state program, I'm not that familiar with it. Is there a place we can go to find information on that? Just to plan ahead?
Yeah, so for the state program, that's going to be, that's already, it's going to be done through our state parks. So state parks is the one who's going to manage the program. At this point, it won't be me personally, just because I'm funded through RTP, so I can only do RTP. But I'm very involved in its inception, and we're designing it right now and sort of figuring out the kinks, like what we actually can fund. But the idea is it will look very similar to the Rec Trails program. What it's coming from is where the Congress, or the state Senate and House, have approved that we are raising the light motor vehicle fee from $6 to $9, and then that extra $3 is bringing a lot of more funds to more places. But the thing it's doing for us is it's bringing a portion of funding to start a new state trails grant program, and we're expecting in 2021 that raise will happen January 1st, 2020, and then certainly we need to accrue the funds, but we're expecting by 2021 to have about $800,000 to $900,000 available in terms of that state program money. And what we've discussed, we've had sort of, I guess, a working group come together once to help advise us being the state, on how to structure the program. And what we've discussed is likely we will have a fall sort of application and funding period for that one. So we, as opposed to Recreational Trails program, which does spring, we'll sort of I don't know exactly our timeline yet because it's little whatever, we're figuring it out, but we'll solicit and fund applications in the fall. It'll be funded through the State Trails Advisory Committee, just the same as Rec Trails program, use the same scoring criteria. Hopefully the idea is it'll look the same, but it'll have a lot less convolution. Yeah, so it won't have the 8-month reimbursement requirement. It won't, I can tell you all the things it won't have. We're likely the match requirement will be less, will not be 20%, and will be less than 20%. Likely, what did I say? Oh, yeah.
An upfront.
Is there an upfront? No, there's no upfront. So it's still a reimbursement program, just like Rec Trails program. Yeah, so anyway, we're working to get rid of, you won't have to be registered in this system for award management and DUNS for that one. And you could potentially use those dollars to match Rec Trails program dollars and Rec Trails program dollars to match those state dollars. So that's sort of the concept of running them at different time periods is, number one, we can give more flexibility to folks who find it really difficult to, apply in the spring or get their funding in the spring, and then they can kind of be used to match one another. So and right now what we know is it'll be eligible projects will include things like trail construction and maintenance, trail side facility construction and maintenance. The question marks are surrounding those things like equipment wasn't called out. I don't think education was called out. So we're still looking at those, but the general kind of big RTP funding things will be very similar. So there isn't yet a place for information on that. That's a good question, but certainly if you're on my distribution list, I'll keep you updated, or someone from State Parks. I'm going to be very involved, so you can also just reach out to me and ask. I can be your point of contact on that until the State Parks is hiring a new person soon to do Land and Water Conservation Fund as well as the OHV program, but that person will probably also be very involved with this because my assistant can't be the answer. So I will likely be working with that person. So anyway, stay tuned and I'll keep you guys informed on that as well. I know a lot of you guys will be like our main contact list for folks to distribute information to.
So fall of 2021.
I think fall of 2021. Yeah. We will.
Not fiscal.
Not fiscal. Yeah. I know. And we really wanted to get off the ground sooner, but it just takes a while to get those things up and running. But yeah. And we need to accrue the money, and we need to get the authority and all the silly things like that. Yep. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Cliff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you guys too. Please reach out if you have questions. Okay. I'm happy. And, any of you folks in particular, being so close, I'm happy to, meet you guys again in person or whatever if you need some help. So, yeah. Thank you.
Is that a permanent increase on the light motor vehicle?
Permanent? Yeah.
Yes. It's all it's not like it's only for 5 years.
Oh, no.
You never know what the legislature.
I was going to say, well, it could only be for 2 years, but no, it's permanent, and they, we're recording. Hold on, let me stop recording.